Are we trying to win a battle or are we trying to be funny?
It's up to you.
It's literally a question I ask myself every day.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flux.
I'm Ben McKenzie.
Welcome to Pratchat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast.
Each month, we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books with a special guest.
This month, we're reading Carpe Jugulum, or The Lancre Tea Party.
And our guest is actor, singer, and cabaret star Gillian Cosgriff. Welcome, Jill.
Hello, mates.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you on the podcast. We've been talking about having you on forever, it seems.
Oh, that's so nice. Well, I'm happy to be here.
I think you've been on our list since the beginning.
Yeah. We recently had you down for a different book because this one's not your favourite. You actually reached out to me and identified your favourite, if I remember rightly.
I did. My favourite is Masquerade, which it's just like maybe the year that I was like 15 or 16, I just would read it and then get to the end and read it again.
It is an extraordinary book. What did you love about it so much?
So I'm very music theatre based. That's my degree in inverted commas, if we can call it that. So I just love all the like phantom parallels and all the kind of, you know, just the theatre of it. I loved, but I love these characters and I love the witches. So it was really nice to read this one, which I've only read once or twice. I actually couldn't remember it. In my head, I thought it was the one about, Otto von Schreck, about the eels and the
the
photos,
truth.
because yes, The Truth, which I also is actually one of my other favorites. But this was great rereading this one. I loved it. It was such a nice treat to jump back into it.
Yeah, I don't think I've read it since it came out like 20 odd years ago. So it was a real treat for me too because I loved it so much. But we'll get to that. But you, you did your musical theatre degree, and let's not bring the mood down. It's a tough time to be in the performing arts right now, as all of us know.
Yeah.
But you had a pretty spectacular gig before all of this shut everything down.
Yeah, I'm in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Yeah.
Yes, whenever that starts being a job again, I will be back in it. So I had done about a year and a half in that as Moaning Myrtle. And then I changed characters maybe 2 weeks before the shutdown. So I did 2 weeks as Delphi Diggory. And now I'm just trying to keep it in my head.
Yeah.
when I ever go back.
You're going to have some sort of extended rehearsal period before you can start up again, obviously.
Yes, I imagine so. We have been doing like cast readings on Zoom, which have become progressively less involved. Like in the early days, everyone was like grabbing lighters and things to kind of, you know, attempt their like magic tricks at home, and now it's just sort of pop in, say your lines and jog off. So
we're gonna have to play Do You Know My Friend Who This afterwards.
Oh sure, I bet I do know your friend who this. I bet I love your friend who this. I miss
they're pretty good friend who, and they also that every so often.
Oh heaven, a scandalo.
But that's just the latest thing you've done in your career. You've had a long career in musical comedy and cabaret in Melbourne. How do you transition from doing your own stuff like that to doing such a big production with a bunch of other people?
Well, you get paid every week, even in January, which is
oh my god,
unbelievable. Like
it's like a dream.
I thought I would get over it, but even like a year and a half in, I would be like, oh, I got paid again, you know. And I don't mean this to sound too like naive, but it's kind of and you don't have to invoice anyone, you don't have to harass anyone, and you're not in charge of tracking. Like, I know that sounds very capitalist, but genuinely that is kind of unbelievable.
No, I think we feel it in our bones. Like, we're so happy for you that was the case, and we hope it will be again before too long. What an amazing experience to have. Yeah, and look, we could do a whole podcast asking you about that production because it is, if you get a chance to see it when it reopens, listeners, I I mean, look, it's tricky at the moment for various political and ethical reasons, but the show itself and everyone involved in it in Melbourne is phenomenal, I have to say. I was very lucky to see it in the 2 weeks when you were performing your new role.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I went to like the one where they invited all the press to come and see it again after the cast change.
Oh, great.
And, it was great. Anyway, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours, but we're actually here to talk about...
Some of us haven't seen it.
Oh, yeah, we have
sorry.
to... What's the hashtag? Keep the secrets?
Hashtag keep the secrets.
We've got to keep the secrets. So we will say no more. We will say no more. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. A wink's as good as a nod to a blind bat. Oh, I knew there was a segue in there somewhere, but... We do
there are
have
no bats in this book.
We have some that there's at least one, I'm sure. But anyway, we do need to talk about a book for hours and hours.
Which one should we talk about? Should I grab the one closest to me? Or?
No. I think we've picked one. I think we'll talk about Carpe Jugulum. And actually, before the first thing we do is read the blurb. But I do just want to talk about the title momentarily because do you think it should be? How would you say it? Is it Carpe Jugulum or Carpe Jugulum? If it's
I say jugulum because it's the jugular, but I also have not studied Latin, so I'm not sure how that whole thing works. But purely on a medical basis, the J seems like it should be a hard J.
What do you think,
Jo? Strongly agree. Also, here's a weird fact I found out this week. Did you know that at the ATMs in the Vatican, you can do transactions in Latin? It's the only place in the world.
What?
I've been there and I didn't know that, and I wish I did. Like, I went to their post office to get to make sure I got Vatican City stamps on my postcards, because I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome.
Weird.
Yeah.
I have like a great what would he be? Be like a great uncle. He's dead now, but he was quite high up in the Catholic Church, and he lived in Vatican City for a while, and then he was like a really high up guy in the Catholic Church in Sydney when he died, and there was like a public funeral and thousands of people went, and I'd never met him in my life. He was like my grandmother's uncle. Obviously on the Irish Catholic side, not the Irish Protestant side. I have both, so internally I'm just fighting with myself all the time. So I identified with this book a great deal.
Yes, very much.
I had to briefly sketch out a family tree in my head. I was like, uncle, how are you descended from him? And then I was like, wait, no, that's not how uncles work. So yeah.
Yeah. It's fine.
Anyway, I would also say Carpe Jugulum.
Okay. Yeah, we went on a ride there. But that's all right. Let's get into it with a reading of the blurb. Miserly Oates has not picked a good time to be a priest. He thought he'd come to the mountain kingdom of Lancre for a simple little religious ceremony. Now he's caught up in a war between vampires and witches, and he's not sure there is a right side. There are the witches, young Agnes, who is really in two minds about everything, Magrat, who is trying to combine witchcraft and nappies, Nanny Og, who is far too knowing, and Granny Weatherwax, who is big trouble. And the vampires are intelligent, not easily got rid of with a garlic enema or by going to the window, grasping the curtains and saying, I don't know about you, but isn't it a bit stuffy in here? They've got style and fancy waistcoats. They're out of the casket and want a bite of the future. Mighty Oates knows he has a prayer, but he wishes he had an axe.
That's a really weird framing of the book to have it all around Mighty Oates, don't you think?
It is interesting. You know, it reminds me of, the collector's library editions, the nice new editions that are kind of cloth bound and have the sort of very stylized covers.
Kind of like the invitations to the christening thing.
Yeah, yes. But the one for Carpe Jugulum is like a picture of the castle and a little silhouette of Mighty Oates's, walking up towards the castle. The witches aren't even on it.
Yeah, it's so weird. It doesn't read as a Mighty Oates book at all.
Yeah.
No, he's a B-plot character.
At best.
Or supporting act. He wouldn't be nominated in the best category. He'd be the best supporting.
Yeah, I guess it's his only book in that sense. It's the only one he's in.
But it's also the vampire's only book.
That's true. And then there's not that many new characters in this apart from antagonists. And our first Igor or Igor, this is another pronunciation question. We run into this all the time because you read these things, you don't say them outside.
I can't wait for us to get to Hodges.
That's a fun one. But do you think, is it Igor or Igor?
It's Igor, I'm pretty sure.
I say Igor.
Me too.
Yeah, okay. But I think there's
I would probably mock someone who said Igor, to be honest.
Whoa.
Because it seems Like, I wouldn't have entertained that possibility, but I'm happy to be wrong and mocked in return. So
This is a mocking-free zone.
we're in a witch's book. There's lots of mocking.
Okay, all right, that's true. There's plenty of mocking. But it starts with, there's no cosmic turtle business, Liz. You must have been very happy about this.
I was thrilled. There was some cosmic business, but yeah, they did a little bit of the elephants and the turtle going through space, but that was just like a side, not like 3 pages of musing on the nature of the universe.
Yeah, we've established, Jill, that Liz really doesn't like it when it starts with like, and there was a turtle swimming through space. She's not into that stuff.
I feel you. I feel mostly the same way.
Really? Yeah.
Too much of it.
Although they do often begin with nature as well. Like there's one that talks about lightning hitting the crags like an old man trying to get an elusive blackberry pip out of his teeth.
Oh, that's a good line. I can't remember which one that is.
If I remember it, it's probably The Truth or Masquerade.
Yeah, okay.
It's Masquerade. The wind howled, the storm crackled on the mountains. Lightning prodded the crags like an old man trying to get an elusive blackberry pip out of his false teeth.
This starts sort of with nature, or maybe supernature, because it starts with a falling bird, but not just any old falling bird.
But we don't know that at this point, so it's like a mystery. What is falling from the heavens and what has made the Nakmak Feegle all kick up a stink?
Yeah, it's true.
And I got to confess, because I've been watching X-Files for the first time, I was like, oh yeah, there's a thing falling from the sky, it's an alien. I'm like, wait, no, that's not this. That's the other thing. But it was just very strong imagery of that.
Yeah, falling star kind of business. But also, yeah, as you say, this is where we meet for the very first time a certain species of tiny blue men. Now, we've already talked about the We Free Men, the first Tiffany Aching book, where they're a major feature of the book. But this came first, Carpe Jugulum, and this is the first time we meet the Nakmak Feegle on these couple of pages. Oh, they're a delight, but they're also quite different. Like, you know, when you go back and you watch like the first film in a series, or you read the first book in a series, and things are there, but they're not quite what you come to love them as.
Yeah.
They're like that in this book. Whereas the witches are like at their most witchy, because this is the 5th and kind of the last book in the main witches series. But yeah, the Nakmak Feegle they're a bit off. Like, they're still great, but they're not what they become.
Yeah, absolutely. I love them. I love them as these weird Scottish Smurfs where I can't understand half the time what they're saying. I briefly lived in Glasgow by accident when I was 20.
Oh, no.
And I was in a band, which was very strange, with a man who I'm certain was a drug dealer. Yeah, had this like giant grand piano made of glass. It feels like a fever dream now. But he would call me on the phone to organise a rehearsal, and he'd be like, "Hi, Gilla, it's Tom. I'm just calling about a meeting. And I'd be like, and there's only so many times you can ask someone to repeat themselves. And I would be like, just text me.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Anyway, he felt like a Nakmak Feegle living large.
Visiting Scotland's the only time I've ever not understood someone speaking English in an accent. Like the only time. And I was only in Edinburgh, but I'm pretty sure the people who came to talk to me were Glaswegian, because I understood most of the Edinburgh people just fine.
Yeah.
But in this book, they're not speaking English. They're speaking this sort of weird, slightly Scots, but every now and then there's like actual Gaelic words in it as well. So I think he's just, and I'm pretty sure most of them are made up. Like, it's not real Scots or Gaelic. So we're not supposed to understand it, I don't think. We're just supposed to get a feel for what it is. And every now and then there is a joke word in there, which is kind of fun. But it's not the comedy Scots accent that they end up with in the Tiffany Aching books, where it's a lot of fun to read it out. I mean, it's a lot of fun to read this out, but also I can't really read it out loud. Like, it's like there's so few words in it that are recognizable. But yeah, they're great. But it's an exciting time to be in Lancre, because it's nearly the naming day for the royal baby.
Mm-hmm.
I actually kind of love Magrat and Verence, even if when they first get together back in Weird Sisters, it's a bit weird, and I was a bit like, I like them together, but I don't quite like how they get there. But by this stage, I'm like, yeah, they work, and I love Magrat finding all these new things to do with her life, and yeah.
I like where they've gotten to as well, because it feels like, you know, when people are around each other for long enough, to get real Enid Blyton about things, they've knocked each other's corners off a bit, so you might not have been the right shape exactly to begin with, but after a long time you sort of start to grow together to fit your own thing, but you fit together, and it feels like they are that. Like they're each independent, but they work as a team. So I kind of liked that as someone who was a bit like, ugh, when they had their 1,000-year kiss or whatever during Weird Sisters. But yeah, I kind of liked it, and I also kind of liked that it visually was kind of like a satire of the Sleeping Beauty opening scene with the fairy godmothers and things. Like that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I love it. I there's so much in this book that I want to talk about, that I love about women in threes and how you have to fill these, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that's part of what I love about Magrat too, is that you get to see her journey from kind of maiden to mother, but because she becomes a queen also, but she's the queen of Lancre, so she's not, she's like a very, in the ranking of queens, she's still probably quite a low status queen. So yeah, I really love that. And I love this whole parallel to Sleeping Beauty of these, like, you know, 3 fairy godmothers, even though one of them is the actual mother, with Granny missing and the invitation lost. And yeah, I love all of that. And I also spent a lot of this book thinking about like Magrat and Verence as like progressive royals. Yeah. And thinking about like Harry and Meghan as just like a sidebar of being, even though they're not really under the, you know, kind of umbrella of a royal family in that way, but just because Lancre is so itself, he has this real challenge in trying to, you know, push the boundaries of that. Yeah, I love it.
And the whole thing about he's trying to introduce democracy or these new ideas, and people go, yep, that's very good, and just ignore it.
Yes.
That's so much more frustrating. People being like, no, we don't like that. We'll talk it through or whatever. But they're like, no, that sounds good. And then just put it in the maybe later basket. Because how do you fight that?
Yeah. I think because it's interesting that, you know, now he reminds us of those younger, more recent royals. But when this was written, like they were barely born, you know. So he's much more, I think, the influence there is more like Prince Charles, who always had this, I mean, for whatever his faults, he always seems to have a genuine kind of interest in the well-being of people, even if he is a bit, I mean, look, I don't know how else to, he's just a weirdo in some ways, but he, you know, but he does seem to care a bit. And I think that's what Verence is kind of modeled on.
But their whole thing also is that the two of them weren't born royals. Like they came to it after they were already mostly formed as people. So that probably also impacts on how they approach their new position in society.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, his education in the Fool's Guild comes up a couple of times in this book, just in little ways, which I also just love as a background of a royal. Like, I think they should all, which again is a bit, you know, Prince Charlesy, because he was famously a massive comedy fan. Like, he loved the Goons and Monty Python and all that stuff. And like, that's why they keep getting invited to Royal Command performances, because he loved them so much. So yeah, I think it's in his DNA, but I love that about him as well.
I just put this to both of you. I found it really interesting that, like, to me, one of the major themes of this was modernizing versus being traditional. And both Verence and Magrat are pushing towards being more modern, wanting things to be a democracy, etc. And then the antagonists, the vampire family, are doing the same. Like, they're both trying to get away from tradition, and yet one set is seen as the wrong approach and one is kind of seen as the right approach. Like, I'd argue that we all think that Verence is probably mostly onto a good thing, like trying to push towards democracy, have less monarchy, but also think that the vampires are doing the wrong thing, because that's kind of the moral of the book, but yet they're doing the same thing at the core. And so, like, that's an interesting divide in the book's message, I thought.
It's funny because to me, I read it, and it's weird when you read things that are like predate the thing they remind you of, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which I know we're going to talk about Twilight later. So,
yeah.
But reading this, I was like, oh, the vampires are gentrification. That's what they are. Oh, it's just like, don't worry, we'll come in, we'll make it nice here. It's not nice right now, but this is the nice way, and you'll like what we have to bring, and it'll be better for you. Whereas I think Verence is absolutely pushing for progress, but within like a deeply seated awareness of like this community and the traditions and the history of the people, and seems genuinely to want to serve that in a way that he thinks will be beneficial. They just don't see it or want it.
Yeah.
That's the difference between the two for me, but I do think that's a really interesting point.
different kinds of modernization and pushing things forward.
Yeah.
We'll get to it at the end, but it's just the way that the plot ultimately plays off, to me, is kind of like, tradition was right. Like,
yeah. Well, and Granny sort of is a weird kind of force of that, like, it's because she never changes. I'm really, because I haven't read the later Tiffany Aching books, I'm really fascinated to know where her story goes, because I know she shows up in some of them some more. But at this point, she's just reiterating my way is the right way. And it always is. And she doesn't really change or learn or grow very much, but that's okay because she's kind of awesome the way she is. But at the same time, I think there's a thing in this, like, where she disappears for a while, where it's almost like basically things will not change, but at some point she will say, right, my time is over. Now you do what you want. But until that time, we do it my way. That's the kind of impression I get from her.
Yeah, but then you get this cool parallel too with Mightily Oates, who's clinging so desperately to like the history of thousands of years of religion. And that actually when he dispenses with that is when he's able to progress, he's able to make change. So it's kind of a flip side of that, I guess.
Yeah. When people have derided, as I was recently researching, in the past, people have derided Pratchett for not being, very serious or complicated. Like, they see him as a sort of this populist comedy author who doesn't need to be taken seriously. But anytime you sort of think about what are the themes that he's writing about, it goes all over the place. There's everything in these books. So yeah, I think you're right. It goes both ways. Oh man. And I had never thought about this as gentrification, but as soon as you said it, I was like, well, of course.
Especially with the town being called Escrow, that like really leaned into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that was great. But there's a lot of things that get set up at the start here, of course. We meet all the witches again. The witches have changed their lineup because this is the book after Masquerade. So technically Magrat has retired. She's now being the queen instead of one of the three witches, which means that the coven is Granny, Nanny, and Agnes. Agnes Nitt, who we met way back in Lords and Ladies when she was pretending to be called Perdita or Perdita. How would you say that?
Perditax.
Yeah. And now that's become like this sort of alternate personality, which in this book goes the next step from where it was at in Masquerade. She's a very important character in this book. And for the first half of the book, basically, it's nearly all her and Nanny Ogg, which I love because Nanny Ogg is my favourite. I mean, I can't deny Granny Weatherwax being one of the all-time greatest characters in fiction, but my favourite is Nanny Ogg. And she and Agnes, like, working together and indeed alone, is a real joy of this book. They really get some time to shine. That in a lot of the other witches' books, a lot of the focus is on Granny instead.
Yeah, I love that. Also, I just loved, it really surprised me, this book, but reading it feels like an action movie.
Yeah.
And so this kind of like buddy cop duo of Agnes and Nanny Ogg is so unexpected. And then you also get that kind of like road movie vibe for the section where you've got Mightily Oates and Granny Weatherwax on the donkey, which I love too. But it just goes like the clappers. Like it really took me by surprise, because sometimes with the witches you do get more thinking time. And this one is just like, you're straight in there with, vampires and everything just from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's non-stop as well. Like, you can't skip any sections. Like, a lot of books you could probably, like, sort of have half a brain through it. But this one, every page matters.
Totally. We've said many times that, Pratchett's writing feels very cinematic. And that's partly, he doesn't use chapters. He just skips from one scene to the other. He'll cut back, and in this book he does it a lot. Little bits of plot are chopped up and served to you as these little tiny hilarious scenes. But when you put them all together, it's like, oh, look at that! Look at what happened there, And it feels real cinematic and real exciting. And I think he really nails the pace in this one too. With some of the early ones, we really felt like, it goes along really well, and then the ending is very sudden. Whereas this one, I think it really builds to a great climax. And then there's like about a 20-page section right near the end of the book where everything wraps up and it's very satisfying. And then there's still like another 10 pages left to have a bit of a come down. It's, it just feels really good.
But should we focus on, first of all, the naming day and what's going on at that? Like, because where the major players are, we've got Magrat in the castle with her baby, which is yet to be named. Nanny is playing both indoors and outdoors to get the maximum amount of food.
Yes. So good.
An approach which I respect deeply.
Yeah, and I like that she has to fill up on the good stuff before dealing with the fiddly canapes and the fizzy wine that she's gotten quite fond of. On the path, on the way in, we've got the vampires. We don't know they're vampires yet, but that's slowly revealed along their journey because there's an Igor, and then we realise there's a family. And then we get a brief cameo from Casananda, who thankfully does not get eaten, but that's how we sort of discover there's something quite off about these people.
Yeah, just on that quickly, I was so happy to see him again, and I was sure he would be in more of the book because I remember him being in more stuff. But I just think I loved him so much in Witches Abroad that I imagined he was in way more books than he is because he's really
I did exactly
only
the same thing. Yeah.
And I was sure he was going to come back, like who he's going to turn up at the party, and no, it's just that one scene where he's watching from the bushes. Yeah, I was sad.
I was waiting for him like the whole time, so he was like hovering at the sides, being like, "Yeah, when's his moment coming?" And it just never did. I'm like, why?
Yeah,
but it feels like something that could have gotten cut in an edit.
Yeah. I guess he wanted to remind us of the character, but didn't want to include him. I mean, there's a lot of characters already in this book. He didn't need to be there. So I guess it's like a nice, fun Easter egg for those of us who love him.
And it adds stakes to the stakes. It adds stakes to the scene where the other person's like taken, because that means we can watch it from the outside, from a character's point of view, and be glad that he's not actually in as much danger anymore.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But then we've got Granny, who's sitting at home waiting for something. We don't know quite what it is. And then finally she gets summoned, but it's not to what she thinks it's going to be. It's to
Mrs.
something that's gone horribly wrong with the pregnancy.
Yeah. And this is very similar to that scene in, is it Lords and Ladies? No, it's in Masquerade when they're on the way to Ankh-Morpork, where they stop off and there's a similar kind of thing where there's a sick cow and there's a sick baby, and she makes the deal with death. And this is, very similar scene, kind of setting the stakes of Granny Weatherwax gets these things done. But also there's that great line where the the midwife is like, oh, go and get the father. And she's like, he's no part in this. She's like, no, but he's like, no, he's no part in this. Like, it's real good.
And the two layers of that, like, I originally was like, oh yeah, he's no part of this because like he shouldn't have the choice over what happens to his wife. It's literally no part of that. But the other edge to that is Granny's softer side, which is that she doesn't want to place that emotional burden on this man. She's like, he hasn't done anything to me. Well, I don't want to hurt him in this way. And I hadn't even gotten the chance to think about that at that point. But yeah, because no matter how it turned out, he would have been horribly burdened by that decision for the rest of his life. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because she does take on so much of the kind of emotional labor and the actual physical labor too throughout the whole series. There was a line in this that I loved that I wrote down that I'd forgotten about, which was that the reward for toil had been more toil. If you dug the best ditches, they gave you a bigger shovel.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, well, you're good at this, so have more of it, which is such classic Granny Weatherwax material and familiar ground for her. I had actually mixed them up in my head and I was like, oh, this is the one where she has the card game with death. That I was really surprised at the way it kind of, plays out so simply.
Yeah.
And I think that makes what happens next cut like more deeply because she's had to take on this quite like emotionally difficult thing. And then as is revealed, she thinks she hasn't been invited to the naming ceremony, even though everyone took great pains to give her the grandest invitation, the heaviest gold, put it in the safe spot and it's been taken. She doesn't know that. So I can see how she's kind of feeling, oh, I do all this for the town. I do all of this stuff. I take on all of the burdens and they won't even invite me to this. Like no one sees what I'm doing. And based on what Nanny says, things have been not great in her mind for a while. So it kind of is like the last straw.
It is a tricky thing when you see a character like that, she always downplays where it's like, I don't want any fuss. I don't want any bother. But you want a bit of fuss.
Yeah.
You want the option to reject the fuss. You want it to be offered, I think, is the thing.
And that's 100%. So much part of Granny's character in every way. Like she just wants people to do what she wants them to do without her ever having to ask, and which is paralleled by the whole sequence with her and Oates where constantly he's pretending that she's helping him when he's helping her because she can't show any weakness. That's such a part of her character. And it's just those little yeah, there's little opposites. And it's the fundamentals of headology as well, you know, which is what she's famous for.
It's funny too, though, because we're always presented with Nanny as the mother and Granny Weatherwax as the other one, the crone or the hag. But, you know, I think a lot of that depends on what kind of a mum you have. Like, no tea, no shade, but this idea of being like, I just want to do everything my way, and that's what I want, and you know, it's no big deal, and I'll just do all this, but you still need people to say thank you, is certainly a quality that I've seen and know in many mothers. Like, there is stuff about her that you're like, nah, some mums are like this. It's just that it's not our kind of historically accepted idea of the mother as the nurturer, even though it's like, she gets shit done, and that's what being a parent is about a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch what kind of parent Magrat is becoming too, to give us another dimension on that, because she's a bit of a helicopter at the start, but also she's quite practical. And then also, and Nanny has elements of this too, but she's just like, my child can do no wrong. Like there's that bit where she said, oh yeah, she said her first word. What was it? Blup. It's like, that's not a word. She's 2 weeks old or however old she is. Yeah, it's just, I think one of the greatest things about the Witches books is you have so many, because Pratchett himself suffers from this problem where in a lot of his books there is like just that one woman who's part of the main cast. You know, if you look at something like Sorcery, there's pretty much just Kanina the Barbarian or Kanina the Hairdresser, and you know that's it. And you just see this one facet. Whereas the Witches are each of them are such rich characters, and then there's like 4 of them in this book, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. And they're just so great.
5 if you count Perdita.
Well, yes. I think that she's throwing off the number of witches in a coven by adding 2 at once. But yeah, she's annoyed at not being invited and spends the time at home and doesn't go, which...
I would argue that she's not annoyed, she's hurt.
Fair.
Because she doesn't sort of question it. She doesn't sort of go, how dare they not invite me? She's kind of like, oh, well, that's what they've decided to do, which is different.
Yeah. I mean, there's a listener question about this, but I feel like this is the vampire's mental influence as much as it is the act of her not receiving the invitation. Because I feel like if she was in her right mind and everything was okay, Granny would just have gone with or without an invitation. So I read this very much as they're getting to her, because she later says like they were getting to me even in my own cottage. So I think it's not just the missing invitation, it's also the vampires are already, you know, through the magpies maybe impinging on her mind.
Well, do you think it's like a poetic thing or a literal thing that it is magpies that stole her invitation? Like, is that literally the vampires taking it and putting it into action like a series of events, or is that just like a poetry thing?
I think it's deliberate. I think they absolutely do it, and I think there's a few little hints of that in their dialogue as they're on the way to Lancre, because they talk about having already, you know, sussed the lay of the land and they know what they've got to do, and they think that they've already made sure she won't be a problem. I think it's absolutely deliberate on their part.
I wasn't sure if that's them messing with her headology or if that's them literally interfering by stealing the invitation. Like, they could have just been putting in doubts in her mind, but the actual hiding of the invitation, I wasn't sure if they deliberately did that or if that was just something that also happened. But because of the whole magpie thing, it seems like is probably literal, but not necessarily. Yeah,
by the end, I feel like it's literal. I don't feel like it in the beginning. But it's also like a nice thing of what you get with Granny so often, which is when people think she's doing something that she isn't necessarily doing, you know, which is like throughout this whole book is like, she's in the baby, or like, she's in Agnes, no, it's too crowded in there. She's in this, you know, and the way that it gets revealed. And just even the idea that she's put herself anywhere else is enough to make you be like, is it me? Is it you? Like, you get so, you know, it creates that kind of paranoia that you come up with it even if it isn't actually happening.
Yeah.
And she like is so powerful it's outside of the book, because I was like, it's that person, no, it's that one. So I was doing the same thing from my safe position outside of the book.
Yeah, you weren't worried that Granny had put herself into you, the reader, although that would have been, imagine that, like, she broke the fourth wall.
Also, honestly, I could use that. It would be so practical and helpful. I'd get a lot done.
Yes.
I'd invite that.
Yeah, for sure.
It was kind of like that meme of, you know, that still of Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where he's pointing at the screen, and that's become like a thing for like, You know, the first one was like when they say the title of the TV show in the TV show and he's like pointing at it. That was like me every time I thought I'd figure out who Granny had projected herself into.
It's such a satisfying conclusion, but we won't get too far ahead of ourselves, because she's called off to deal with the troublesome birth. She comes home. Meanwhile, at the party, things are progressing. Agnes is meeting the new priest, Mightily Oates, who's got a great Omnian name because he's an Omnian priest who's going to be doing the christening ceremony, or the naming ceremony, as it is called in Lancre. And what a great character he is. I really loved him.
Yeah, he's heaven. I love the idea of someone who has committed their whole life to a religion and a faith, but is smart enough to be able to go, there's some incongruence here. Like, where he's talking about trying to work out all the different great floods and, you know, whether they were the same one. And
yeah.
I just like that no one ever speaks directly down to him about it, or, you know, directly judges him, but does just go, you know, like where he talks about brother wandering in the desert and not eating meat, and Agnes going, was there meat to eat in the desert?
Yeah.
I love it. When I was a kid and we were meant to give up, we were raised Catholic, we were meant to give up stuff for Lent. I used to upset my mum by saying I would give up marzipan. Just like, I don't eat marzipan, but also I never break my promise at Lent. So.
Yeah. Yeah, which, I mean, you know, obviously is dodging the point, but yes, I think it's a good way to get around it.
I was just trying to find that quote about how he's just one of those people who, even if you're a nice person, he inspires bullying in you. And I was kind of like, that's just such a good descriptor, because there are those people and it's horrible. But
we used to call it a punchable face.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
We're like, you're not bad, you've done nothing wrong, and yet a fist is forming.
No. Yeah, that's a perfect description. Oh, poor old Mightily. I mean, and he's trying to do his best. Nanny takes an instant dislike to him. Does not want a bar of him. There's that great line early on where she's talking to him, and it just says, Nanny could turn her back on you while looking you right in the eye. And I'm like, yes, that's what she's doing. Mostly because of the Omnians' history and them being famous for burning witches. And there's so many great lines about that, culminating in that one near the end where Granny talks about how you never burned any witches. You might have burned some old ladies. You didn't burn a witch. And you're like, whoa.
Oof.
True in the real
fire
world.
thing is a big, like, dare I say, motif throughout the whole thing as well. Like, I noted, like, all of the different times that fire came into it. And it's just a really interesting, if you wanted to write an English essay for year 10 about it, you absolutely could do, like, a decent 2,000 words on just the role of fire as symbolism in this book. But,
yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of that, but that's absolutely true. Oh, wow.
Yeah, the good words don't burn, or the words that matter don't burn is like, A+ material.
Yeah.
Great. That's good. But look, we have this party. There's going to be the naming. Magrat's a bit freaked out because she's like, Granny's not here. She's supposed to be the godmother. And Nanny has to step in. And Nanny's like, oh, well, I guess I can do it. Like, she's fine with it. But she's like also literally poking Mightily Oates with a stick while he's doing it to make sure he doesn't say anything too Omnian or religious. And they do the ceremony. And Magrat has been very careful to write the note about what her daughter's name is going to be. And Mightily looks at it and he reads it out. And she is named Esmeralda Margaret Note Spelling of Lancre. Which is such a... Oh, yeah, wow. One of our listeners said it reminded them of Cake Rex. You know, the website where people post pictures of cakes that have gone wrong, where they've ordered them. And there's so many where someone's written a note that's like, please write happy birthday in blue icing and don't misspell blah, blah, blah. And they write the whole thing because they're just taking it too literally. It's so good.
And it spawns off that whole section about the names around Lancre because everyone's really literal there. And my favorite is, James, what the hell is that cow doing in here, poor James? Because it just raises so many questions. Like, what is that cow doing in there?
They needed to have a door installed, clearly.
Or uninstalled.
Yeah. At that moment, like, Granny kind of senses someone saying her name. but she doesn't understand the significance of that. And that's kind of the moment where she goes, sod this for a game of soldiers, I'm off, and leaves her cottage. Which is like, I mean, we'll talk more about her decision to do this because I have very definite feelings about it, but it is quite shocking at the time. You're like, where's she going? What's she doing? What's happening? And nobody even knows yet because the party just keeps going.
But the whole party goes with a trepidation of like just waiting for her to arrive.
Yeah.
Which in the Sleeping Beauty parallel, I guess, is Maleficent rocking up and flinging curses everywhere.
Yes.
Like even at just the idea of this party where the whole time everyone's like, is it now? You know, like surely when they say the name, the doors should fling open and she'll be backlit and it'll be everything.
Mm.
So it feels really almost anticlimactic that she goes off to the gnarly ground.
Yeah.
Which I loved your description of, Ben, by the way. You said it was like the equivalent of running your through a whole bunch of different servers to like.
Oh yeah. Because this is my theory, right? Is that I think Granny's already onto this. She knows something's up. Someone's messing with her mind. She doesn't know how yet, but she can feel that it's happening because this is like her whole deal. And so she's headed up there so that she's out of reach. I think that's fairly clear. But yeah, it did feel to me like, it was like hacking, you know, like when someone, and you see this in Hollywood hacking movies, like where someone's like, we can't trace them fast enough. They bounced their IP through 16 different servers. And they always explain it that much because they're like, the audience doesn't know anything about how hacking works. We have to make this explicit. And I think that's what she's doing, you know, like it's too hard to reach her in there. Mm. So I think this is deliberate. You know, this is where I'm going with this, is that I think she knows.
Yeah.
And I think this is all part of her plan. And I think we realize that once Nanny speaks to her alone in the cave. But I think she also genuinely didn't know that they had invited her or that they named the baby after her because, of course, her first name is also Esmeralda, which is it's just beautiful. It's a lovely thing to do. I really like that. And I hope that young Esmeralda of Lancre turns up in the later Tiffany Aching books. I haven't read them, so I don't know. But I'm hopeful. I want to know what she's like when she becomes a little girl and grows up and is cool. But yeah, so Granny's left. The party continues on with a bit of trepidation. There is a moment where the doors fling open before the naming happens, but it's just some new guests arriving. And the guests are the vampires because they've been invited by Verence, who's trying to be, you know, modern. And
diplomatic,
yeah. Which I think is a bit, I don't know. How do you feel about this? Do you think he's actually stupid enough to think it's fine to just invite vampires to your castle? Or do you think he's under some kind of influence that they've somehow got him to invite them, which kind of seems contrary to the whole they have to be invited first rule?
No, I think because in previous books, his whole thing is that he learns things from books. Like he'll send away for something on a subject. So he doesn't learn from experience. He learns from the literal letter of the law or ideas. So if a book says that it's important to be diplomatic and reach out to things, he will probably try that. So I think it's that thing where it's like when you wish for something from a genie and it sort of backfires always. It's because he hasn't got every thread happening when he does something. So yeah. I don't think they're influencing him. I think he tried to do a thing without thinking through every element. Or maybe he thought through every element that was available to him with the limited resources available.
Mm.
It's a bit like that. There's a quote in the book that I wrote down which just says books that were all about the world tended to be written by people who knew all about books rather than all about the world.
Yeah.
And I think it is that. I think it's like, oh, we're having a royal naming day. Well, then how do you do that? Okay, step 1, invite foreign dignitaries. Great. Like it just... And he is that kind of progressive that is... I don't want to be too political, but like the tolerant left, where it's like, no, we should be inclusive and, you know, equality and democracy and like, you know, I'm not going to discriminate against these people because of their dietary requirements. Like, absolutely, you are welcome.
Sure.
It's always that thing with Verence of like everything being done in good faith and absolutely backfiring. Like Genie's always backfiring you.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's too nice. He's too warm-hearted, I think.
Which is also why he's so quickly taken under the influence as well.
But I do like that he was fighting it, and that it was like clear that he was fighting it. So that's sort of, there is like an underlayer of steel probably from all of his rough nights of being a professional fool.
Yes. Yeah, because he's the only one who you see fighting it. Like, apart from the witches, obviously, although even Nanny doesn't fight it at the first because she doesn't realize it's happening. But he's got sweat running down his face, and you can tell that he's like trying to fend it off, but he's just not strong enough, which I thought was a great detail that he included, because it just, it shows that he is the king, and he's rightfully the king in as much as anyone can be rightfully a king.
I thought maybe it's because he's actually just naturally so good, and because he's so warm-hearted, and they're all talking about how, you got to kill someone here and there for the greater good. Like, it's overall, like, the big picture's important, but I feel like there's a part of him that can't tolerate that, even though his mouth is sort of going, yeah, that sounds reasonable. The part of him that's got absolute right and good in it is like, no, that's very bad. And that's the bit that's fighting. He doesn't have that shade of grey area that the vampires have that's like, oh, do we want to like sweep in and kill a bunch of people, or do we want to like organize to kill people from time to time in exchange for stability and stuff? And that is kind of like a parallel to some of the arguments about how to handle COVID at the moment. Sorry to bring it back to that, but it's kind of the two different viewpoints. It's like, is it cool to just sacrifice a few for the economy? Or like
the Boris Johnson approach, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that brought that to mind for me. They're like, oh, well, if we're going to take a truly utilitarian view about it, and prioritize the economy over individual lives, they're just kind of like that. And Verence couldn't be having with that.
Yeah.
It is also all the bad stuff about gentrification, which is like, we'll just come in and we'll just make a nice green space here, and we'll make a nice cafe here. And actually, like, these commission houses, they're really bringing the tone down. So, and just pricing people out and slowly, killing them slowly and with kind of progressive ideals.
Yeah. Quote unquote progressive. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd say that because the viewers couldn't see you do that. Viewers. But yes, no one even realizes they're vampires at first, except for Agnes after she meets Vlad, who is the son. So we should talk about the vampires. They're obviously very important. So we have the Count de Magpire, spelt in the pretentious vampire way with a Y, and his countess, his wife, the countess, and their two children. Weird, vampires have children in the Discworld, it turns out. Vlad and Lacrimosa.
Is this where we can talk about vampire boners now?
Oh, yeah, Gillian, sorry. I said Gillian because I feel like I need to be formal to prepare you, because in our last episode, Liz promised she was going to talk about vampire boners.
Promised, threatened,
Yeah, it was a bit of both. I don't know that this is the right time, or maybe it is.
Vampires have kids. How do vampires have kids? They're dead. Their bits don't work. Like, you can bite people and make them your children that way, but like...
Did they have them before they became vampires?
No, it's implied not, because the Count was a vampire and made the Countess a vampire. But on the other hand, I mean, like, there's so many different... This is one of the fun things about this book, is there's so many different weird vampire myths and stories, and most of the ones mentioned in this book, even the really weird ones, are either real or not very different from real ones. Like the vampire watermelons thing, that's a real myth.
Is it?
The tools that might bite you if you don't use them, that's a real myth. Yeah, and a lot of them are like obscure, and like only people in like this one valley in this one place ever, talked about that. But yeah, they're all, most of them are real, and they're from the real world. But then, the Magpie family very much represents the modern idea of the vampire in some ways, like the kind of vampires you see in something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade, where they can, have this kind of pretend life, where they can sort of make themselves a bit more human for a short time. And they're much more, sort of thinking seriously about this stuff. But I mean, if you want to talk about vampire boners, though, does Vlad have one for Agnes? I'm just going to put it out there.
He definitely has an emotional one, vampire boner for Agnes.
How serious is he about it? That's what I want to know.
You're trying to deflect me from talking about the actual vampire boners, so we'll come back to that.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So I think I've thought about it for this book specifically, and maybe they're not actually dead in this book, because like vampires traditionally are a human who's been killed and brought back with like the soul of a demon. basically operating them but keeps characteristics of the original person. But essentially it is a dead shell that is animated and thus does not have a circulatory system that can produce a boner or a baby, because you need to have like a live body to do that.
Sure.
So, but if we look at this book, maybe they're not actually dead, and that's not because like a lot of the traditional vampire tropes are rejected in this. Especially when you see like the idea of people fighting off being bitten and having a choice about whether they become a vampire. So like perhaps it is more of a state of mind thing. Well, not really, like, because there are all the tropes where they can't be properly killed. They'll like be dead for a bit, then they'll come back. So maybe they're not the traditional vampire in terms of a dead human body, except they can be converted from humans. So it's confusing, right? But in order to get a boner, you have to have a functioning circulatory system, unless magic is causing the boners, which I guess is possible.
But I mean, you know, you could say the same thing about everything in vampires. Like, to walk around, they need a functioning muscular system. Like, but
Yes.
they're dead, so it can't function. But they do. So I feel like if you can imagine a dead body moving around and talking and biting people, surely pumping
You can
blood
imagine it having a boner.
that they're drinking. Yeah. It's not like they're lacking blood. Like, they've got too much blood. I mean, in Vampire the Masquerade, the role-playing game that was very popular in the 90s and early 2000s, it's magical. Like, when they drink the blood, it becomes magic in their bodies, and it kind of just infuses through their whole system. All of their bodily fluids become blood. So, like, if they cry, it's like blood. And presumably if they do other things that I don't want to think about too much, because we're already talking about vampire boners.
Hot
That
yoga.
is also blood. Hot yoga. Yeah, exactly. Hot yoga.
The vampires were early adopters of Bikram. Also a bad person, so it checks out.
Oh, true. Who had weird mental influence over his followers. But yeah, it's, I don't know.
It's weird, like, because like if they eat blood, does that go through the digestive system but then come through as blood? Like, why bother going through all the tubes to begin with? Because the whole point of that is to extract all the stuff. Like, it's weird to me that urine starts out as blood. Like, it's just liquid taken from blood just to get more sort of. But yeah, so like if they're eating blood but then it's not food and it doesn't turn into anything else, like, it just, they may as well just be like a hollow flesh sack full of blood.
An IV bag, essentially, with a face.
Yeah.
And arms
That's
and legs.
kept in place
And
by
a
magic.
waistcoat.
Yeah, like a balloon man of blood.
Like a sky dancer. Oh, no. But this is the fun of fantasy, right? Is that you take, and this is the fun of Pratchett's approach, is that sometimes he doesn't really do this too much with the vampires, just little bits here and there. But he takes a sort of a science fiction-y kind of approach to fantasy, where he does kind of make things run on a kind of logic. He doesn't like try and break it down and make it make perfect sense, but he just sort of has a way in which it kind of works. And in this book, because he's rejecting those vampire tropes, we don't have to make, like, we can have kids if we want to. And then he's got the point later on where he says, but vampires don't often do it because, like, as one of them says, you know, we're not raising successors, we're raising competitors because we live for ages. So, yeah. I kind of just want to know if we're done with vampire boners.
Yeah. As one final thing, not about boners in general, it's about vampires. I think the thing that bothers me is that they're so close to human that human rules almost apply, whereas with most other things I can suspend my disbelief and go, okay, like there's magic, or like with Frankenstein's monster, I can go with that. I can go with pretty much like werewolves as well. But because vampires are basically like a weird form of human and people want them to do kind of human things, that's for me where I stumble, because those two things don't quite overlap. You have to break rules without explaining them. That, you know, I'm not expressing myself well, but it's too close, and that's why I can't suspend my disbelief on vampires.
Okay.
I mean, if you want significantly more in-depth detail about specifically vampire boners specifically, Twilight is the place to get that.
Oh, no.
Just knowing that the boner is very cold and very hard is just...
No.
I've read the Southern Vampire Chronicles, which is what the True Blood books are based on, and they talk about them being cold there too.
Yeah, just like mounting a steel post. Like, it's just...
Oh, God.
Sounds deeply unpleasant.
And painful, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound great at all. It
No.
sounds like the opposite of great.
I can't wait to read Midnight Sun and read about them from Edward's perspective.
Wait, what is this? I don't know what this is.
Oh, there's a new Twilight book where it's written from Edward's perspective. I think it's out now.
Well, there you go.
It's just free money, basically.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So this brings me, though, to the point of Vlad having a boner for Agnes.
Yes.
Because she's impenetrable.
God, no.
We veered away and then we veered straight back into the art.
Straight back into it.
But it is this whole thing of like vampires and young women with open windows and billowing curtains. That's always what it is, this Victorian era of like a monster penetrating an innocent.
Oh, yeah.
That's, that's absolutely what it is. And so with Vlad and Agnes, I don't know that he has a genuine interest in her. It's just the game. It's the fact that she's not like everyone else. But it does also like sometimes tie in with that kind of manic pixie dream girl thing too, where it's like, you're not like other girls. Other girls are stupid, but you're a girl I can get behind. Like, it's just very strange to see that play out in this kind of narrative.
And Lacrimosa has that line later about, we have to find room for her like with the others. And it seems like he's kind of like, this is his thing that he does. So, yeah.
I think that was the clincher for me. Like, I was very much like, you're not really, like, you don't see this person. Like, I can't remember. I think it might have been Clementine Ford or someone was saying on Instagram, when you talk to a lot of men who are terrible in relationships, you ask them about their partner, they can't tell you anything about her. They just know what she does for them. That's exactly what he's like. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what Agnes is like, except that, it's going to be difficult for me to get her, so I've got to get her. And she's interesting because I don't know how to get her. And you're like, that's gross, man.
Yeah.
And then, he's like that, absolutely, with these
He's literally a predator.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But he presents so nicely, which I think is, unfortunately very accurate to true life, Like, I know in my past, I had to learn not to be a misogynist dickbag because that is how we're all raised as men, right? And you have
maybe
to
that's how they get
unlearn
vampire boners. Sorry, I took you were saying something serious, and I was like, maybe they have a misogynist dickbag.
Oh God! But yeah, you have to unlearn it, and every man learns that. It doesn't matter how nice they are or how well brought up they are. We all learn those things, and we all have to go through the process of unlearning it. Nowadays, hopefully, some men don't learn it because we talk about it more and we try to pass on the countering messages at an earlier age. But yeah, it's real. I hated him so much. And he's supposed to be the nice one though. I mean, but I do kind of love the Count as much as he is an arch bastard. He's just one of those real suave villains.
Do you think he was supposed to be the nice one? Because from get-go, for me, he was a villain. Like, for not 1 second did I think he was the nice one.
Vlad, you mean?
Yeah. The Count, I thought, had more of a chance of being the nice one if there had to be one out of that family. The Countess was a bit nothing. Like, she didn't really get any sort of character beyond being the wife and mother and formerly human, so I didn't get any sense of her. But the Count seems like he was described as kind of like a Lord Grantham kind of character, like a lord who sits in his library and learns about things and wants to tell you about the exciting new book he's just read. Like, he's drunk his own Kool-Aid, but he does seem to genuinely come from a place of something, whereas Vlad is kind of like a traditional vampire with the new modern smarts that are backing up his animal instincts.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think within the family unit, the Count actually occupies someone who's like, I understand our history, I understand where we've come from, and this is where we can go in the future. And then you get this beautiful sidebar storyline of Lacrimosa and her friends who call themselves Wendy and Pam. Just like the goth version of vampires is super preppy, which I love.
So good.
And that kind of has nice parallels too to stuff that you get in some of the earlier Witches books about Agnes calling herself Perdita, and somebody calls themselves like Diamanda, or there's like another weird name that I remember.
Yeah.
So it is this like weird, like whatever you are raised with, you want to be the opposite. You always want to reject the ideals of your parents, even if you don't know how you were physically conceived by them. It's such a nice storyline that Lacrimosa is this kind of sullen, and that the Count has done so much work to be like, we reject our narrative, we emerge stronger, to the point where there are questions that I had never thought about, where I think he's like, onions don't hurt us. And then he's like, am I afraid of a shallot? And I was like, oh yeah, like garlic, onion. What I'd always pictured it to be brown onions and garlic, but could it be red onions? Could it be spring onions? Could it be? There's so much variety in I think it's the allium family.
Yeah.
It's kind of nuts. And then that beautiful moment towards the end too, where once Granny is starting to get to them, where they realize that actually what the Count has done for the kids is make them so much more aware of every single threat that they're more susceptible just by quantity, by knowing, these obscure religious symbols that they might not have previously even known. Is kind of unbelievable. I love that.
That was so great. Yeah.
So good.
And it's a different theory too, because like I was reading up about this, there's lots of different ideas about how vampires would work and why those things work on them. And one of the big traditional ones, and this is apparently it's the official position of the Catholic Church, is that the thing that makes vampires recoil from a cross is the faith of the person holding the cross. And that is an idea that you've seen in like vampire films where, like someone holds up a Star of David, or there's a Doctor Who story where there's vampires, where there's a Russian soldier who holds up his pin representing the revolution. And then the Doctor himself, when the vampires are coming for him, is standing there. It's actually a really nice moment where he's just reciting the names of a bunch of his past companions in whom he has absolute faith, and the vampires, they have to fuck off. So that's one theory. And then there's another theory that no, God is doing it. So it doesn't matter if you believe or not. Presenting the icon is presenting the power of God to the vampire, and they can't resist. And then this book is about, the third one, which is the vampires believe it's going to hurt them because they believe they're damned. And so that's why it works. And that's what the Count is trying to counter. But I think by the end of the book, it's really not clear which one of those things is true. Like, it seems like it must be in their minds because they're able to overcome it. But then again, is that just because the Count believes so fervently that he has the faith that they can overcome it? And then as soon as that's weakened, it all crumbles and stops, which I guess is a version of the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting too, the way that I think stories around faith become distorted and what is allegorical gets taken as being literal. Is like that beautiful moment where Mightily Oates and Granny, the donkeys run off and she's lost her boots and she's freezing, and he turns to the Book of Om, by which I mean that he literally uses it for kindling.
Oh, such a beautiful moment.
Which is such a beautiful moment. But I was like, in the 100 Years to Come version of Mightily Oates is this young guy telling this story about, lost in the wilderness with this sick old woman, but the Book of Om saved them. You never think about the practicality of that being like, you get told that it is faith, but actually it might be a practical application of faith that is, a more pragmatic kind of approach to solving a problem.
Yeah.
Like staking someone with a cross.
Yeah.
Yeah, stake's a stake, whatever's handy.
Yeah. And that becomes such a big part of his journey too by the end, when he's confronting the vampires in the final showdown, which is, so great. Once Agnes and Nanny realize that there's vampires, they try to do something, but they realize everyone's already been mesmerized by them, and, there's not much they can do except fight them directly. And that's how they realize that the Count has conditioned himself and his family to resist all these traditional banes of vampires. The way Pratchett presents it, it's like the standard Discworld vampire is very much your sort of Hammer horror, Bela Lugosi, wears evening dress all the time, the thing that the Count from Sesame Street is parodying, and not a modern vampire at all. So the Count and his family are really a surprise, and there's not much they can do against them. They have to leave the party before Nanny can be brought out of their influence. She's already under it. And then they go back, they try and fight them, they realize it's not going to work. And you have
to mention that the driving force behind that is Perdita, because she is the one that isn't under the spell. Like, Agnes kind of gets put underneath it, but the thing that saves her from that is that she's got this second person who's like, what's going on? Why are you drinking from this Kool-Aid, basically? And so, yeah.
I like the way they describe that as being like a seesaw. They'd get a bit of a grip on Agnes, and then Perdita would rise up and go, hey, leave me alone. And then they'd get a bit of a grip on her, and Agnes would come back, because they could only take over one mind or influence one mind at a time. I thought that was a fun way to describe that. Although weird, because it really sets in place this concrete idea of Perdita as this other identity or other personality. And it is a bit of a... I think it's fun. I think Pratchett does a good job of sort of treading the line where it is a fun concept and it doesn't quite stray into maybe a gross caricature of what real mental illness is like, because we're not expected to think about this as a mental illness. We're just expected to think about it as And they explicitly say in the book, everyone has this kind of inner voice. It's just that Agnes is a witch and has given hers a name. So, of course, it's become a real personality, which I thought was a nice way of kind of handling that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a few years ago seeing Laura Davis, the comedian, talk about giving a name to her horrible voice.
Oh, yeah.
And it was only when I reread this book, and that's a concept I've come across a lot in, therapy and things like that, where I have friends who are like, yeah, I just call her, I can't remember if this is Laura's or someone else I know, where they're like, it's just Brenda. She's very lippy today. And I just, just whatever that inner voice is that for some people, naming it is actually a really helpful quality, where it's just like, not today, not now, not your job.
I like the idea of giving it a specific name, like Perdita or Brenda, or, I guess mine would be called like Kevin or something. Oh, that's mean to Kevins. Sorry, Kevins.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, no. But like naming it is very useful. Like, I mean, one of the concepts I've come across is the idea of shame gremlins or shame goblins, because shame is not a very useful emotion. Like regret is useful and guilt can be useful in the right circumstances, but shame is just like, I'm a terrible person, rather than I did a terrible thing and I need to learn from it and not do it anymore.
Yeah, it's a really good concept. I'd forgotten about that, so I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of nails that really well.
Yeah, that's how I've always kind of thought of Perdita, is just that voice being like, you've worn the wrong outfit. You should have been late. Why were you early to the party? Why didn't you bring anything? Why did you bring something? That was stupid. Just never give you a break ever.
Yeah, I could identify with that for sure.
Yeah, which is the nice thing about her, is that she's kind of, and in this book particularly, she gets to be the one that's like into Vlad, pushing that side of Agnes. That's really interesting, the way that you see all that play out.
Yeah. I mean, Perdita's really not a very nice person, though. I do not want to hang out with her. And I don't think she can sing. I don't know why I have this impression. Like Agnes,
that
obviously
gets mentioned in the book.
Oh, it does?
It says Perdita would maybe it's in Masquerade, but it's literally like Agnes can sing in harmony with herself. Perdita would sometimes join in, but she had quite a reedy voice.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm glad.
Which I love.
There you go. That's where that comes from.
Yeah.
But look, there's some back and forth. Nanny and Agnes are like, we've got to do something about this, but they just can't get through. Like none of their anti-vampire stuff that they know. And this is where they sort of start that running joke about, everybody knows this about vampires, right? Which builds up throughout the whole book.
The sock thing was my favorite thing ever. It's like if you take one of their socks, they'll leave you alone because they have to find it for the next 100 years. Yeah.
I don't know if that one's real. I was saying before that so many of them are real. But I don't know if the sock one is. There's definitely ones like that. Like there's the one where like if you scatter rice in front of a vampire, they have to stop and count all the grains of rice, giving you time to escape.
But the sock one, I think he might have made that one up, and I do like that it came up at different points in the book. Like they all did, but about how they count. Like he'd finally gotten past his thing. He's like, you can buy more socks. It's okay. You can always get more of them.
Yeah. But he's still annoyed because it was like, they were silk. They cost $100 for Magmorpork. Yeah, but basically they've given Verence the fluence, and he has agreed that
for influence.
Yeah, they will rule Lancre. It will become a duchy of the Countess's own lands back in Uberwald, and there's nothing really they can do. Although there's a great moment where Perdita like knees Vlad right in where he would produce a vampire boner. Yes,
in the Lost Boys. Yeah,
it is Lost Boys. Oh no. Yeah, and that all goes on, and they're just like, well, we can't fix this by ourselves. Whatever Granny's up to, we need her. Let's go get her. Like, this is all mental stuff. That's her domain, says Nanny. Meanwhile, though, I don't want to leave out Hodges. How do we all want to say it? We should all have a go. How do you pronounce his name?
Hodges.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I feel like you got to go up, like, because it's clearly like... Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I love that.
I can't improve on that at all. I think that.
Yes, perfection.
I probably don't need to.
But he's the Castle Faulkner introduced in Lords and Ladies, maybe mentioned in a previous book, but he's noticed that maybe there's a phoenix, and he slowly sort of puts that together from weird stuff that he's seen. But then he's like, well, there is a
fire
phoenix
again for our essay.
Yeah.
Yes, year 10s. You've used the word juxtaposition 3 times.
You've only misspelt it once. The
leitmotif does not have a 1337 in it.
Oh, God. That's got to be somebody's, like, derby name, though.
Surely.
But yeah, he's going out to try and find the phoenix. I love the way he applies his knowledge of being a bird watcher and a professional falconer. And there's several times in the book where it says if only he just thought a little bit further, he would have figured it out straight away. But he can't find the phoenix anywhere.
I thought that meant he was going to die.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was like, oh, if he thought a bit further, I was like, oh, he doesn't get to think through the next level. No, it's because he didn't think through the thing.
Yeah. But yeah, the witches set off to find Granny. Not only is she gone, the whole place has been cleaned up. Stuff in threes has been laid out. The clock has stopped at 3. She's even smashed a cup to make there be only 3 cups left in the set. And the only thing she's taken with her is this small box which contains her personal belongings, because a cottage doesn't belong to a witch. It belongs to the position of being the witch. So once you stop being the witch, you give it up and the next witch takes it over. And they see a bunch of magpies, and Nanny's like, this is not okay. Oh no, she thinks that she wasn't invited and she's not needed anymore, and she's left, which means the positions in the coven have shifted around, and Magrat's now the mother, obviously. You're clearly the maiden, which means I have to be the other one. She just complains about, I'm not the right shape, I don't know how to do it. Like,
my bras won't fit.
But then she does, yeah, but then she really takes it on and just has a go, and she's pretty good. It's like I said, I love this whole first part of the book where it's the Nanny Og and Agnes show. It's great.
But it's also wild because it's like, again, tapping into the whole power of belief thing. Like, she doesn't have to change how she is. She can just keeping on being herself. But there's tradition, there's belief. And it becomes like, is she becoming like this because she has to? Like, there's a force that does it. Like, is she choosing to, or is she being forced to because that's just how things are? And that's, again, the sort of the beliefs being... like the vampires not believing in the things that kill them, like, which is like what is actually happening there. So I feel like that's another parallel.
Also, like Maiden, Mother, and Crone, this is something I was thinking about. I was like, well, why should this be the case for women and not for men? But I suppose it's because there is an actual like anatomical change between each of those 3 stages as well. Like, you know, something is broken and then, you know, then you're talking about, I guess, kind of becoming a mother and everything that entails physically. And then to me, it's like menopause is kind of the thing. Like you have these actual physical changes as women that are much more delineated than, you know, for a man becoming a father, nothing physically changes in your body other than, you know, back pain from carrying a baby, but that's life now, I guess.
Yeah, dad bod's not a thing, really.
Dad bods, yeah, the dad bod, otherwise known as the male change.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. It's such a staple of mythology, like going all the way back to the Fates, you know, I'm going to get their names wrong, but Clotho and Lachesis and, you know, the Greek ones, and the Norns in Norse mythology. But with dudes, like particularly wizards, they're quite solo. A lot of modern wizard ideas in fiction is based on Lord of the Rings. And there are 5 wizards in Lord of the Rings, although 2 of them have sort of vanished. So there are kind of 3 left, but they don't work together. It just happens that there's 3 of them. They're doing their own thing. I can't think of any male equivalent in mythology.
A couple of years ago, I wrote an opera with Casey Bonetto and Julian Langdon, which is still the funnest sentence I ever get to say out loud. And and it was called Lorelei, and it's 3 women, and it's about...
I've seen it. Sorry, I just yelled that.
You have? Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
We did mention it when we were talking about Masquerade, actually.
Oh, that's so cool. But
And I interviewed the director.
Oh, you did, Sarah Giles?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, this is what I was going to talk about.
Excited.
No, I love this yelling. I'm always in support of excited yelling.
So I was waiting for it to come for another season because it had like 3 sessions, and I wanted to recommend it to everyone, but I saw the last one.
Waiting.
Okay. I will.
Me too.
But
you explain it because it's great. So.
Well, because it's a 3-hander for 3 women, and we wanted to very much write about them as their own separate entities, but a problem that we continually kept running into was being like, oh, but if she's the this one, then she's the this one. And because they're Lorelei, they're sirens, they're immortal, they're kind of, you know, of the fantastical realm. We talked a little bit in the beginning about it having like a Waiting for Godot kind of a vibe, that they're like stuck on this rock for just millennia. And we would keep trying to write that, and then we'd be like, no, it doesn't quite work. And Sarah Giles, the director who I am obsessed with, who is Heaven, made this great point to me that I have not stopped thinking about since, which is that men on stage or in literature represent humanity, women on stage represent their gender. And so one thing that I hadn't thought about until I was reading this book again, which has this kind of, they talk a lot about the three, is that I never felt like that with the witches when I was reading Terry Pratchett, because they support each other. They don't exist in competition. Like, there's something really beautiful about that Granny Weatherwax is so relentlessly high status that there's no getting around her being that way. Yeah. And then Nanny Og, everything just sort of bounces off her because you can't embarrass her in any way, shape or form or make her feel bad. And that then both Magrat and later Agnes fill this kind of younger role of, doubting yourself. And so there is a beautiful transition in this book about Magrat becoming a mother, where Agnes talks about it, how she starts to make sort of Nanny Og-ish jokes because she can now. That's really beautiful that she's still Magrat, but she's not sort of wet anymore. Like, she's not this flimsy little thing. I really love that.
She's damp, wasn't it? The line.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's the one time you ever see Nanny shocked in any of the books is when Magrat tells a filthy joke. Yeah. You're like, whoa. You're doing this? And then there's that later bit where they basically talk about vampire boners and except non-vampire boners, really. King boners. And it's just, it's delightful. I love that. And yeah, I think, each of the witches has so much going on because in this book, when Nanny starts to step into that role of the other one, she's not that different. And there's some things that she does in this book that you could argue are from that influence, but also if she'd done them in another book, you wouldn't have been that surprised. Like when Igor's wasting time mourning over his dead dog, which is sad, obviously. And I hope that there's a book version of doesthedogdie.com so that you can find out if that's going to happen in a book that you're reading.
But it'd have such a complicated answer.
It would in this book, yeah. It reminded me of Frankenweenie by the end, the old Tim Burton movie that got remade into a new Tim Burton movie. But when he's wasting time mourning over his dog, and she just her arm just shoots out and grips him like a vice, and it's just there's a baby in danger. Shut up. We don't have time for this. Your dog's already dead. We got to concentrate on the living. And you're like, I would buy that from Nanny Og in any book, but I would also buy it from Granny Weatherwax. So I think they do have these cool crossovers where they don't just fit neatly into their boxes. Each one is a complex and interesting character. And I think that's why they're so great and so beloved.
And Nanny has that great thing about, again, state of mind, that she was never in her head a maiden, even when she was, from their definitions of it. So that I think that taps nicely into that.
Yeah, which there's that great bit in that when she's talking about someone who, if you told her a dirty joke, if you were quick enough, you could cook breakfast for 6 on her head, which just reminded me of one of my favorite phrases of all time. She'd cry if you told her she had a wooden leg. One of those people who will cry about anything. So
that's me.
Yeah. I have a few friends like this. And I kind of love that as a phrase.
That's wonderful.
But look, they obviously can't find Granny. She's not in her cottage. Nanny tries to find her using magic, but she can't find where Granny is. Wherever she is, she's hiding beyond the realms of magic. In fact, she's gone up to gnarly ground, which is a bit of Lancre where all the geography has become scrunched up because there's not enough physical room for it. It's a bit magically weird. And they do describe it at one point specifically as being bigger on the inside. So it's very clear Doctor Who reference there. I don't think you have to drink for that one, listeners. They're like, well, we can't find her on our own. We're going to need 3 witches to do magic powerful enough to find her. Oates turns up at the cottage at that time because someone had said Granny wasn't here. Maybe she's not okay. And he just was going to see how she was, which is something none of the locals would do for fear of being instantly killed by the stare that they would get. But he and Agnes go back to the castle and get Magrat so that there's 3 of them, although there's that great bit where she brings the baby and all of the baby stuff. And I feel like this was clearly written by someone who's a parent. I don't have any kids, but I have so many friends who do that. I feel like there are elements of that experience that I have kind of absorbed through osmosis. And having to carry the big bag of stuff everywhere you go seems like just such a universal experience.
Several bags.
Several bags, yeah. Well, I mean,
so there's a bag for diapers and a bag for dirty ones, and then there's a whole farm set, and
Yeah, as Magrat enumerates. But they managed to bring her back, and she brings the baby with her, and I kind of love that she's just never questions this. It's like, I'll just bring the baby everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, she says, I think it's possible to combine motherhood and a career, which is great.
# busy working mum.
Yeah, I mean, look, also, she is a queen and does have a nanny. In fact, 2, if we count Nanny Og. So, she's doing okay. She's got a few advantages on that score, shall we say. But yeah, the Count can't find Granny either. He's trying. He's using his magpies to spy all over the place. But eventually the witches do scry where Granny is, and they go in person to go and find her. They can't fly through the gnarly ground. They have to walk the last bit of the way. And they have this great weird sort of adventure where they're seeing this vast landscape, which is on the inside of the gnarly ground. But at the same time, it's really just a small patch of earth. And Perdita can see the sort of version that exists outside of the little sort of scrunched up bit of reality. And there's this great bit where Agnes does the real Lara Croft bit where she's like hanging off the bridge and she pulls herself up and does a handstand on the edge. And they're like, did you just do a handstand on the edge? And it's such a clear Tomb Raider reference. And the thing I love about that is that apparently Terry Pratchett was a big Tomb Raider fan. He loved the video games. And Rhianna Pratchett, his daughter, who's now well known as a video game writer, wrote the reboot versions of the first 2 Tomb Raider games, which are really good. And I thought, oh, that's a nice kind of lineage. I had no idea of that connection before rereading this book. And eventually they do find Granny hiding in a cave. And she doesn't have her I ain't dead sign on. She has a sign that just says, go away. That's great.
That's a 2020 mood. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But she's not having any of it. Like they do wake her up and she's like, nah, there's 3 of you. You take care of it. And this is the scene where they tell her invitation got stolen by magpies and that they named the baby Esmeralda. And she clearly, genuinely did not know either of those things, which is such a rare instance where Granny's like caught out and feels anything about it. But in the circumstances, there's not really that much time or space in the story to make much of it. But it is still such a big moment. I kind of loved it. But there's the conversation that she has with all of them there. And then there's the conversation she has when Nanny pips Magrat at the post to be the one who finds an excuse to go back and talk to her one-on-one. I love that they have that little competition where she admits that she just doesn't know if she can beat the Count because he's such a powerful vampire. He's had hundreds of years to learn how to influence people's minds, and she just doesn't know if she's got the power to take him on, which is a big admission from Granny Weatherwax. It's a pretty full-on bit of the book, but I really love that conversation where she's just straight up, I don't know if I can beat this guy. You guys have to have a go, and I should stay here. I can't remember if she says this in as many words, but I kind of feel there's an undercurrent of, if he gets power over me and I turn to the darkness, you're all fucked.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm just staying here in this cave. And you're like, okay, that seems fair.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the others leave. And I'm like, okay, we're not giving up, though. We got to do something about this. But it's just, I love this whole bit in the cave.
Yeah, it is really wonderful to see all 4 of them just together without anyone else, without anything else going on, to kind of, the new coven kind of emerges, which I love.
Do we ever find out what the rhyme for, like, when they had the whole, like, 1, 2, 3 mean different things? Like, what was 4?
The version I know is from Megan Washington's song, which is 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for the young, 6 for the old, 7 for a story that never gets told.
Oh, that's another different one. I don't think that one's in the book.
Yeah, there's so many.
There's a song version by a folk group from the UK called the Unthanks, and they use a version that's basically the same as the one that Agnes uses in this book. So it's 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never told. And that's basically exactly the same as the Agnes one. And I think that is one of the more well-known ones. But the one that Nanny says is more like one that's documented in a book of Scottish folklore, although even that's not quite the same. So where they say in the book that there are all these different rhymes for what magpies mean, but none of them are reliable because they're not the one that the magpies know, which I thought was such a good line. I think that's true. Like, there's heaps of them. But they head back and they try to come up with a plan. One of Nanny's first plans is, well, this guy Vlad, he's into you. Just marry him and then put a stake in him while you're in bed. And there's that inner voice conversation that she has where she says out loud, I'd rather kill myself. And Perdita says, in the morning.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I love it.
Oh, yeah. Which I guess means he must be, like, I know there are physical descriptions of the vampires, but they're not super detailed because we know what a vampire is supposed to look like. But he's clearly a babe.
Well, they say that he's really attractive when he's first introduced. Like, she's very interested. Is he one of those, like, poetic types that you picture, like Mary Shelley? Like, kind of that kind of, yeah. Because then the opposite of that is, like her Moses' friends, there's the one who grows his hair short and dresses like an accountant. So, like, the opposite of that is what a vampire looks like.
I just love the phrase grows his hair short as well.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's genius.
Oh, yeah.
Is this when Nanny Ogg assembles the mob?
It is.
Oh, my favorite. I love this.
Yeah, and it's like, to be a spontaneous mob. Although just before that, this is where they finally meet the Nakmakfigel. And because they've been watching in the cottage, and Agnes has spotted one earlier but not really known what it is. And now they're in Nanny's house and they spot one and she catches one. And she can understand their language. And I love that in Witches Abroad, the fact that Nanny could speak other languages was kind of a joke. It was like, she doesn't really speak other languages. She kind of just vaguely understands what people are saying and pretends that she can actually speak other languages. But in this one, she really can speak Figel and understands what they're saying and translates for everyone else. And this is where we find out the Figels and the centaurs that have shown up in a couple of times in the book and the Phoenix, they've all been ejected from Uberwald in the lands of Count Magpie, because he's like, we don't need any of that nonsense. We've got a new order now. It's just vampires and people. That's all we need. Everything else is superfluous and ridiculous. And they've been pushed out of their home, and they're pretty pissed off about it.
Like a certain Lord Farquaad forcing all the magical creatures out of his kingdom.
Yeah. Right. They kind of make a deal with the Nakmakfigel, which is like, okay, we're going to give you this island to live on. And Nanny just sort of does this without anybody's permission, which is a very Granny Weatherwax way to do it. And I think this is clearly the influence of the role of the crone starting to take over. But she just does it and then says, well, you're the queen to Magrat. You make it official. And then organizes the mob. Let's talk about the mob and the Oggs.
I love it because I'm from a giant family. And just the idea that you could just muster like a group, enough people is just, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Absolutely.
That's cool.
Like my gap year of touring, like traveling overseas after school, was just like, yeah, there's a cousin here. You could, like, I planned where I was going to stay based on where various cousins and their former housemates lived.
That's amazing.
Free couches.
So is the system of photographs true for all big families? Like Nanny's system where, like, you get demoted because of your spot, like where your photo is?
No, that would require us all to ever be in one place, which is too difficult. But that is a wonderful point. Yeah, I do love that. I think my Nana had something like that. I think there was an array of photos. That's great.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And it's just nice to see the other Oggs whenever they turn up, you know. Jason, I particularly like Jason, the big blacksmith. And there's a great description of him in this book where he's like, he was so big and strong that, you know, as typical of men who are actually big and strong, he never wanted to ever do violence. And you're like, yeah, I've known guys like that, you know, who were bouncers. And it's like, I'm a bouncer because I want to stop other people getting in trouble.
And he knits really intense socks because he's so strong.
Oh, yeah, from the Lancre wool.
The socks can stand on their own.
I thought that was cool. And the assembled mob basically are a distraction. Like, they show up at the front gates, allowing Agnes to just walk in because she's impervious, and kind of gets caught up in, like, learning the sort of Magpie family history. And there's that great bit where Vlad's showing her the family paintings, and it's like a history of vampires in cinema, which was hilarious. That was great. And then she lets them into the castle when they all go to talk about the mob, and they decide they're going to confront them. But it doesn't really work because, you know, the Count is a super powerful, hundreds of years old vampire, and he just controls the weather, and there's like lightning and windstorms. And just as everything seems like it's all over, Granny enters. But even that, the Count has predicted that this is the moment where she's going to make a grand entrance. And she looks really weak when she shows up, because she's still trying to fight off his mental influence. And she's able to do it, but she's kind of doing it through this force of Granny Weatherwax will, which is sapping her strength. And she even manages to, like, give him like a mental slap in the face a couple of times. But he's like, well, that's quite good, but it's not good enough. And grabs her, and instead of killing her, all the vampires drink her blood. And Nanny and Magrat are like, well, this is fucked. Let's get out of here. Agnes, you hold him off. We've got to escape. Which Agnes is sort of like, well, that makes sense, because there's that great line where she goes, well, there's instead of 3 witches in danger, there's just 1 witch in danger. But also, that's not okay.
Yeah.
But there's also that bit during the confrontation where Granny says, well, it doesn't matter what you do to me because you know what I can do. I'll send my mind somewhere else and then you won't know what I'm doing and I'll come back and I'll do something else and you can't predict it. And they're like, whatever, that's why we'll make you into a vampire. And then, you'll just be subservient to us. Because they also established that the way that it works for these vampires is if they drink enough of your blood to make you a vampire, but you don't allow them to, then you become a subservient kind of, the Dungeons and Dragons term is vampire spawn. So you're kind of like a junior crappy vampire who's like a minion of the big ones. But if you embrace it, then you become a proper vampire.
You wouldn't want this information to get out, though, because then if you're getting murdered by a vampire, you'd kind of be like, okay, I'm going to decide that I'm into this so that I'm not like one. Yeah. I'm like, actually, you're going through your pros list of why it'd be good to be a vampire as like you're being killed, because then you can be like, yeah, you're not a shit vampire. You're like a good one.
I love a good supernatural loophole. That's genius. But when they do drink her blood, they're like, oh, she's put her mind somewhere. And Nanny and Magrat think they know where it is, and they run off trying not to think about where they think it is. And I kind of love that little subplot of what they think is going on is not what's actually going on, like you were saying earlier, Jill. It's really cool. It's not great for Granny. They all drink her blood. This is something alluded to in some of Oates's vampire notes from his university days that he's already looked at, where they talk about
nerd.
All the vampires, all the vampires drink someone's blood so that they'll be susceptible to all of their influence. And again, it's just like a sort of a remix of all these traditional vampire myths, which I love. But they just throw her body outside the castle and Agnes is out there. And she and Oates are like, fuck, what are we going to do with it? We'll hide her away, which they do. Before we come back to that plot line, this is the point in the book where Verence is saved by the Nagmagfeegle and carried off down the Rushy Glen, as is quoted at one point, like from the poem, and hide him in their little barrow, and he meets the queen of the Nagmagfeegles, and they Aggie. Look after him. And I love that whole bit. It was so good.
Kelda, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, again, has real Nanny Og vibes.
Yeah, very much.
With her big family and all of this. It's just, it's extremely Nanny Og vibes.
Yeah. It's also, this is where for me it really kicks up a notch into action movie vibes, because you have this ABCD plot where you have Nanny Og and Magrat in the carriage going to Uberwald because they have to because of the storm, and you have Verence in the burrow with the Nagmagfeegle, and you have Agnes dealing with Vlad and flying and all that kind of stuff. And then you have Granny Weatherwax having this existential dark and light, which side will you choose experience with Mightily Oates and Hodgesar coming in. It just, everything is happening at once in a way that's just so, exciting to keep reading all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And he cuts back and forth from the scenes and he just really manages it well,
Yeah.
The Verence one is strung out over, and I wrote this down because I was fascinated by this. That happens in 6 different segments. And really, when you think about what happens, he gets carried into their barrow, they rid him of the vampire's influence, and then they feed him some stuff to make him go berserk, basically, so he can fight back and be a proper king. And that all happens over 6 little vignettes in between all the other stuff that's happening. And it's so good. I love it.
Yeah, I had never thought until you pointed out before that there aren't chapters, because also I read it on my Kindle and I was like, oh no, maybe I've got a weird Kindle version that's, how formatting can be weird. And it took me a bit to get my head back around it, where I was like, oh no, now we're here. I must have missed a page. But the advantage of that is if you don't break it up, then you as the reader don't break it up. You don't naturally stop at any point. You just keep rolling, which is so exciting.
Yeah, it's one of those things that makes it feel like a film. Yeah. There's so many cool things going on, and I love this sort of that they're all going to meet up at the end. It's like something like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, where there's all these different trajectories of different characters and different plots, and they're coming together, but you can't quite see how it's going to happen at the start, and then as it kind of goes on, you're like, oh, they're going to, and it's so good. Which one do we want to talk about first?
Let's talk about Granny Weatherwax and the anvil in the blacksmith.
Oh, in the so smithy. Good.
It's gorgeous.
She just puts her face on it and it starts to heat up and there's sparks and stuff. It's an amazing scene.
Fire again, huh? No.
Can't get away from the fire.
It's deliberate, but yeah.
Have you guys talked about this before? I haven't really thought about it until now, but you do get this recurring thing through all the books about Granny Weatherwax being worried about kind of going bad, you know, like in the way that the Gingerbread House Witch does. And that she's always afraid of this thing that sort of might happen to her mind that she won't be able to prevent. Do we think there are parallels for that with dementia, with Alzheimer's? For Pratchett, personally?
He certainly has written more overtly about dementia by around this time, because like the second Johnny Maxwell book, which are these non-Discworld kids books that he wrote, explicitly the Johnny Maxwell character has a grandmother who's like suffering from dementia in a very Alzheimer's kind of way. But his diagnosis wasn't until quite a few years after this, so he had no idea.
Okay, sure.
But it is genetic, so it may be that it did run in his family, and so he has some experience of it from a parent or grandparent. So it could be, but I think that comes in more in the later books. But that's an interesting way to look at it, yeah.
I just am always fascinated by this thing with Granny of like that she worries that it'll just be out of her control, and that all she can do is stay as sharp as she is, but that it will be like almost like an external thing that happens to her. And this book and this vampire moment is really only a brief kind of dalliance with that compared to some of those other ones. Like, is it Witches Abroad with her sister? That's kind of the Cinderella one. Yeah. Yeah, I just had not thought about it before, but this, you know, external worry of like a physical or a mental illness that's maybe in your family history that you're like, it's coming for me and I have to be really careful about what I do.
That's really interesting because I hadn't thought of it that way before, but it does make a lot of sense. I think there's a few things you could read into it. Like there are like fears of things that you've glimpsed from your family that you might worry are in your future, not necessarily one specific thing. Like there could be there could be personality traits, there could be
hoarding. Hoarding.
Yeah. So I guess it could be specifically that, or it could be a more general fear of things you might have in your future. To me, I'd always read it as, I don't think this is a comment on everyone having this, but I think perhaps there's a lot of people who worry that they are at heart a bad person who is managing to just be good. And if you let that slip for a moment, your true nature will come through. So I always read Granny's sort of inner grapple as that, because if she isn't constantly working to tamp down the natural bad side of herself, then she's worried that will win through. Whether that is actually the case or not, I think is also unclear, because she thinks that doesn't mean that's necessarily actually what's happening.
I think there's also the thing that she has great power, and that power corrupts, and it's like, well, she could do whatever she wanted.
Yeah.
And so the penalty for that is she has to choose not to do whatever she wants. She has to do what's right. And that's hard because it would be so much easier. It'd be nice. You know, it's like sort of light side, dark side conversation.
Yeah. It's also that thing like with nature documentarians, how they can never interfere. That's their whole rule.
Oh, yeah.
They'll be like watching like a baby elephant like getting left behind and being like, if we just gave it some water, and the rule is like, no, you must never.
No.
We're just here to like observe. Not that Granny doesn't interfere, but, you know, she could interfere so much more, and she does often decide whether or not to weigh in, I guess, and how much.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, the two natures thing as well, because she's worried about having this dual nature within herself. She literally has a twin to represent going the other way. Like there's already that exploration. So it's kind of like extremely zoomed in and again in on herself when there's this external one that's already been explored. So it's just kind of interesting.
I do like that in this one they kind of finally answer the question of her ancestor. Like there is this answer she gets from the old count near the end of the book who says, oh yeah, she came to Uberwald. And she's like, what happened? Oh, she staked me. And she's like, yay, my grandmother wasn't a bad person.
Ben did wonder whether Alison Weatherwax was, in fact, Black Alice. But no, Black Alice is Alice de Murridge. She's just the archetypal example of the witch who went bad, and the one that everyone thinks of, not just in Lancre, it seems, but across the disc. Despite what J.J. Abrams may think, not everyone powerful is related.
Some of the Weatherwaxes have gone evil. I could go evil. You know, and most of the other Weatherwaxes we've seen in the books are. Like in one of the really early ones, the Arch-Chancellor or one of the high-up wizards at Unseen University is a Weatherwax, and he's pretty nasty.
Yeah. And so when she comes back from that, she also has that conversation with Hodges about the phoenix and how
Yep.
so they go to like what is it? Not the owlery, but
The muse.
the Discworld equivalent of the owlery to find.
There's your Hogwarts showing through.
Yeah. Oh no.
That sounded ruder than I meant it to.
Find,
I'm so
yeah,
sorry.
how dare you? It is a genetic condition. To work out which of the other birds the phoenix has taken the shape of, right? Because that's such an interesting thing that I've never thought about too, which is like, how does a phoenix know what it's supposed to look like because it never meets its parent?
And there's that implication that the thing that he didn't think through is thinking about all the survival tactics that a phoenix would have, and he never thinks, oh, and it would look like just another bird.
Another bird, yeah.
Until it, has to reveal its phoenixy self, which is cool. And it's such a creepy, it's a creepy image because they put the hood on the bird and they keep referring to how it still looks directly at you, even though it can't see. And there's a little bit of light, leaking out because it's like little flames. And, it's so good.
Yeah,
I love
great.
it. Once they've got the phoenix, that's when Granny and Oates head off on their pilgrimage across country to go to the castle because she's sure that's where they're going. Meanwhile, that's where Magrat and Nanny end up because they've taken the magpie's coach and their path is blocked going another direction. They have to go into Uberwald, and the old vampire count had fixed it so that anyone going along that road, their coach would break down and they'd have to go to the castle for help. It's a very Rocky Horror kind of, there's a light at the Frankenstein place kind of moment, which I love.
Especially the castle being called Don't Go Near the...
Yeah.
Don't go near the castle.
So
And
good.
don't go near the parking garage 20 meters away.
Those signs are hilarious. So they're on their way to the castle.
And they're with Igor too, which adds so much fun to this little journey.
Yeah.
Such a good character.
Yeah, and I think he's our first Igor, but the first of many, and they're all so good. I mean, look, aren't they all really one or all many, really? There's
You
so
don't just
many.
meet one Igor.
But there's so many good gags about, oh yeah, I've got good ears, and he's like, well, we don't all get to choose, which is such a good gag. But yeah, they're all on their way there. But I think the most significant journeys there are really Granny and Oates and Agnes, who Vlad approaches and tries to woo her to no, come on, but you want to be a vampire, check out how cool it is to fly. And he does all the flying, which is a very modern vampire thing. Dracula never flew unless he turned into a bat. But, you see vampires flying in stuff like The Lost Boys. So it's something that comes in in the 80s and 90s. And they're flying around all over the joint. And they go to the town of Escrow, where the magpies say this is where our plan worked. Everybody feels safe. They actually use the phrase they've exchanged freedom for security. And I have to say, I don't think he really states explicitly enough what the arrangement is in that town. It's left a bit too vague for my taste. But from what I read into it, instead of what would happen before, which was the vampire would just sort of descend at random and maybe bite somebody or spirit them off to the castle to turn them into a vampire, and they never knew when it would happen, so they always had to board up their windows and be scared. They've just talked to everyone and just said, we're vampires, we live here. We're going to drink from all of you at some point. So let's just arrange that, and then you don't have to be scared of it. And when we turn up, we'll do a lottery. We'll make it fair.
To me, it has a real Hunger Games moment. Just
Yes.
as a volunteerist tribute, where it's just don't worry, we're at the top of this food chain, and we've created a system that's not ideal, but better for, it's this whole the greater good, where it's one of you will suffer all of the suffering, but the rest of you will have basically no suffering.
And they're about as happy as the people of District 12 as well. Which Agnes sees through straight away. The Count is yes, this works great. It's fine. Everything's great. And Agnes is no, these people are miserable on the inside. I mean, sure, they don't have to have bars on their windows, but they know how gross this is.
It's an extension of the asking the husband to choose which one dies out of his partner and the unborn baby. It's they will carry the suffering for longer than experience an unexpected quick suffering outside of their control.
Yeah, because you're asking them to become complicit in it and to be involved rather than it being something that happens to them. It's no, you're going to agree that this is how it is now. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's cool. Well, it's not cool, it's horrifying, but
Yeah.
you know
As
what
a
I mean.
writing thing, it's done well.
Yeah, it's a cool bit of writing.
Also, another, as we said earlier, big parallel to COVID in the UK of Boris Johnson literally being look, we'll lose some old people, but this way no one has to be locked up in their house or wear a mask. It's just insane.
Or some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
Thank you,
To
Bojo.
bring it back to Shrek again.
Yeah. And this is where Agnes thinks she's been turned and she wakes up and they're doing all the remedies on her, right? The lemon in the mouth, but it's an orange because they didn't have a lemon. Or
At least they haven't cut her head off yet like the other vampire.
yeah.
Because it's also where the vampires start acting real weird. They start fighting with each other. They stop getting along. They can't really fly very well. And the villagers notice this and they're like, this is our one chance. And in fact, the mayor is the one who kicks it off because he gets his mayoral chain of office and like tries to strangle the count with it, for which he gets like broken in half by his vampire strength. It's quite awful. But the villagers are like, there's something wrong with him. Like, get him. And there's a mob and a whole big fight. And that's when Vlad bites Agnes as they're trying to get away. Which, is the beginning of something weird happening to the vampires. There's a few hints of it, particularly with Vlad a bit earlier, but I love that. But yeah, they keep thinking she's a vampire, but she's not.
And then she still makes her way to the castle. I can't remember how she gets there, but everybody ends up at the castle.
Well, she joins up with the mob because the mob are like, this is our chance. Maybe we can get rid of them all together. We're going to go to the castle. And she's like, well, I better come with you. And there's a nice little detail in there where she's like, how can you beat them? They're flying. And they're like, well, they didn't look like they could fly very fast. Plus, we can cut through the woods where the werewolves live because they're not interested in chasing us because we're not interesting enough. We're too slow. But they don't get along with the vampires very well. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. A nice bit of narrative explanation. I enjoyed that.
But shall we skip straight to the Home Alone vampire sesh?
I think that is great, but should we talk a little bit about Granny and Oates' pilgrimage? Because it is kind of amazing. It's possibly, I don't know, it's hard to pick a favourite in any Pratchett book, but I think it is one of the best bits of the book.
It is really beautiful, the kind of discourse between them about, faith and whatever. For me, it also... And maybe this is more when she gets to the castle and she's confronted with the vampires. But it's like that Wesley and the Princess Bride thing of being like, I'm mostly dead.
Yeah.
That beautiful moment at the end of the Princess Bride where he's like, yeah, maybe I'm dead. Or maybe I'm just like lying on the bed because it's comfortable. Or maybe I do like the fortitude to stand. You don't know. Like it's just this. And the beautiful thing too in that whole book of her, like her needing him to pretend that she's helping him. And just the way that he plays along with that just makes him so likable. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. But yeah, I think the Home Alone section where they're dispatching the vampires, because the vampires arrive at the castle to be greeted by thrown bottles of holy water, because Nanny and Magrat have been able to just tool up. Like they've just like armed themselves to the teeth because the old vampire count believed in being fair to his victims. So he had all kinds of anti-vampire stuff in his own castle, which I thought was a delightful way to explain it. And it works on them. Like they hit, this is one of my favorite puns in the whole book. They hit one of the vampires and his vampire name is Cryptifer.
So good.
Which is it's one of the best things ever. But he gets burned up in some holy water. It sets him on fire and he dies. The vampires are like, oh no, whatever's happening to us is making us susceptible. But the count is like adamant, no, we can do this. And when they get inside, they can't do it. All the junior vampires are getting picked off by like the bucket of holy water on the door and the like weird like trap with the stake that springs. And it's very Home Alone vibes.
Or like the Rock picking off like a whole team of soldiers in the Scorpion King. Yeah.
Yes. That is not the reference that I would have thought of, but I agree that it is like that, yes.
So I'm just thinking about The Rock because he recently tore some gates off his own house because there was a power cut and he needed to get to work. So he just ripped the gates off. He's just recovered from COVID.
He has? I didn't know he had it. Oof.
His whole family had it.
Golly
gosh. Oh, wow.
They can still rip a gate off its hinges. So.
There's nothing, he can't be stopped. That's why he's The Rock.
Unlike the vampires who all get killed except for like the family pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically a whole lot of stuff happens in this sequence. Scraps unfortunately gets killed, which we've talked about.
Because once they're all together, like once Granny and Oates arrive and Nanny and Igor are there, Magrat is hiding in the crypt in the bottom of the castle to be safe with the baby.
Classic.
But then Oates says, how safe can it be? Like the thing everyone knows about vampires is they could turn into mist. Yes, the Countess does get through the lock as mist, but Magrat traps her in a jar with a garlic. Throws it down the well. It's so good.
Meanwhile, Igor is waking up someone that I'd been waiting to meet for most of the book. As soon as they were like, oh yeah, they don't really die. He's dropping some blood onto a pile of ashes. And the old Count is back.
Yes.
Oh, that is great, yeah.
And then also my favourite action movie reveal of Granny Weatherwax just calmly drinking the cup of tea as she arrives. Oh.
And she does that thing where she pretends she's a frail old woman again and someone brings her a chair to sit on and she sits down with a cup of tea. And the vampires, who by this stage have started saying things like, tea, I gotta drink tea, which is something that I felt on a very... when people say I feel attacked by this very relatable content?
Yes.
This was me and the vampires craving tea. Because she eventually reveals what she's done. She couldn't mentally get through the Count's defenses, so she didn't. Instead, she put her mind into her own blood. And so when they drank her blood, as she puts it, one of the best lines in the book, I haven't been vampired, you've been weatherwaxed.
Oh, so good.
Oh. Bloody good plan.
Yeah. How dare you? That is hilarious, though. Oh, it was so good. And the way that all the vampires are staring at the tea as she's stirring it, and then she throws it on the floor, and then later on she reveals they don't even have any tea. It's a vampire castle. I just stirred some mud into some water.
All right, that's right. I forgot about that.
Oh, so good. And this basically is the end of the Count's plan. Like, he can't really recover from this, although he refuses to give up because he is acting like Granny. So he's not only craving tea, but he refuses to give
stubborn.
up. He's fighting with his own family, and he wants a big showdown, and he gets one. But as he is holding the baby and Magrat hostage, and Granny's like, I'm not worried because I could never harm a child, so I know you can't because now you have to behave like me. He tries to leave the castle, and this is Oates' big moment. Earlier on, Granny's told him to sharpen the axe in case she turns into a vampire, and he's still got it with him. And he has a bit of a back and forth where the Count tells him that's not even a holy symbol, the axe. And he just says, oh, and then he just has this moment of inspiration, is let's make it into one, and cuts his head off. And it's so good. Oh, so good.
Real Neville moment. Sorry, keep.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right, though. It was. Oh, yeah. And then you kind of get the wrap up, Vlad tries to get Agnes on board, and she's just like, nah, not having a bar of you. And the old Count, after making friends with all of the descendants of villages he used to know from hundreds of years ago, promises to teach Vlad and Lacrimosa the old ways so that they won't be jerks. And then they all turn into magpies and fly off, which I love that. And actually, one thing I didn't mention before, when I read this book for the first time, I didn't know that magpies were not just an Australian thing. And I was kind of surprised that they were such a big deal in a book by an English writer, drawing on all this European sort of folklore.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute. And then I looked it up and I was like, wait, of course. Like so many things in Australia, we've got magpies here, but they're just a local bird that looks like magpies in other countries. So Europeans called them magpies, but they're different birds.
But yeah, I looked up the folklore of magpies. They had this whole thing about demonic possession and stuff. There's all sorts of stories and things that people believed about magpies. And I'm really looking forward to sitting down and just reading through a whole Wikipedia whole of that. But
Yes.
there was a church that started a rumor that magpies carry a drop of the devil's blood in their tongues. And so there was kind of like all kinds of stuff that is bonkers. And I'm like, this is what people do when they don't have TV. They go, what can entertain us? Oh, look, there's a bird. All right, what can be wrong with this bird? I know, it's got the devil's blood in its tongue. That's okay. Now that constellation, that's 3 stars. That's a belt. All right.
Yeah. And I love a good alternate form for vampires, Like bats are just done. Magpies are so cool.
Yeah.
Next time I play a vampire in a game, I want to be able to turn into magpies.
If there was an evil bird, it'd be minor birds. Those birds are jerks. Magpies are fine.
For our non-Australian listeners, if you're not familiar with Australian magpies, I mean, they are the terror of the skies during mating season because they're very territorial and they're not afraid to swoop human beings, by which I mean fly directly at you and bury their beak in your head in a very dangerous and frightening way. But they also will learn to recognize friendly humans and make friends with them and be nice to you. Like, they're very smart and they're just the best. Just please learn about Australian magpies. They're incredible.
Also, there's all this interesting stuff at the moment about how magpies aren't coping with us wearing masks.
Oh, yeah.
I got swooped by a magpie near Ceres the other day, and my friend that I was walking with was like, you have to take off your mask to show you're not a threat. And I was like, absolutely not. No. There's just no way of doing that. But apparently it's a really bird enthusiasts are really fascinated at the moment by this idea that, like, we're going to change the behavior of magpies in the same way that, you know, like you wear like a helmet with cable ties on it when you're a kid, or it's a very Australian thing to have the school I went to in Brisbane, an ice cream bucket with eyes on it, just get them that you all had to wear walking between classes.
Apparently part of that is that, like I said, they make friends with people, but if you're wearing a mask, they can't recognize you.
No, exactly.
And they think you're somebody else. Yeah.
Is this why people think Australia is not a real place?
Yes, this is exactly why.
Because the birds want to kill you unless they know you're a friend, in which case they like you a lot. And you're like, no, that's not what we mean.
Ice cream will protect you.
Yeah. Well, it's like there was that meme that's like, what visitors to Australia are afraid will kill them, and there's like a picture of a crocodile and a spider and a snake, and then it's like what Australians are actually afraid of, and there's a picture of a magpie. And I'm like, it's true. It's true. But yeah, this is the culmination of the book, and then we get this sort of nice denouement, the come down from that, where now everyone knows what Granny's trick was. She's paying for it. She's just exhausted. She's nearly died like 6 times. She had to make the big choice between the darkness and the light, and so she has a bit of a snooze. Meanwhile, Oates has like found new religious, not fervor, but like appreciation for just the world around him. And he's like, you know what? You decide what's holy. Like, you don't have to choose between what all these other people tell you. You can find it in the world around you, which I thought was really lovely kind of place for him to get to.
I also love that he has that service and he ends up playing the hymns that are like the hummable tunes instead. Yeah. Just from like, I remember like growing up, you know, Catholic and going to mass and it blowing my mind the first time with this like couple that would sometimes do the music at Sunday night mass, which is like the cool mass. And
okay,
there's like a rock version of the Our Father that gets played. And this is what this made me think of. Yeah, because you learn like the hymn version and then the rock version is like, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And it's like,
whoa.
I just imagine Mightily Oates being like maybe embarking on the cool church, like sort of your like Hillsong vibe.
Oh no.
Just as an option
awesome.
of enticing the masses. So great.
That was great. That was so great. And I particularly also liked that before he's allowed to do it, like Nanny sort of grudgingly is like, you're all right. And if you ever need a meal, you'll get a meal at any Og household. And you're like, that's a big deal. Like that's 100 places across the Ramtops where you can get food for the night and somewhere to sleep.
And then Agnes brings him the thing for his boil.
Yeah, because she's now this. I'm interested to know what you thought of this, because there is that thing where she's taken a shine to him. Like initially, she thinks he's like very punchable, like you were saying, but by the end of the book, she's like, "Oh, you're all right, actually, and you're kind of good looking apart from that boil. Maybe I could give you something for it." But he's still going to leave because he's decided his destiny is to take the word of Om into Uberwald and see if he can do some good there. But how did you feel about that?
I'm tired of there always being a love story shoehorned in, but it also did feel like the natural thing for them. Like, I feel like it wasn't written with that in mind necessarily. The way that they interacted and how they were written, that made sense. So perhaps the end goal wasn't in sight when the characters were put together, whereas sometimes it feels like it's the other way around.
Also, what we haven't covered that I totally forgot is also that Mightily Oates is impervious to the vampires because...
Oh, yeah, because he's in two minds about everything.
He's in two minds about everything. And that is interesting, too, where it's like just because these two characters have this specific thing in common, to me, is like that doesn't necessarily mean you should end up together, so I like that they don't. But it is like a nice common ground between them, I think, throughout.
Yeah. I like that Granny also recognises that there's more Agneses out there than even Agnes thinks. Like, she thinks she's unique because she's got this other voice in her head. But like we were saying, lots of people do. They just don't give it a name and cause it to come alive.
Yeah.
The boil thing is interesting as well because Nanny had that whole thing about you shape your husband or you can turn a man into something else. Like, and she talked about how like she made her husband bathe or whatever. And that's kind of, to me, taps into that as well. Like, because she's shaping him, but he's not, like, because he is kind of a romantic interest, but not really.
That kind of brings us, though, to the end of the book. Really the very last thing that happens is we get this nice view of the kingdom going back to normal, including Granny just watching over everyone by borrowing an eagle and then an owl and amending her sign so that it says, I still ain't dead, which was pretty great. Again, I think that we're in the period of Pratchett's books where he's really absolutely on his stride and pretty much everyone is great. And yet there's still books I haven't read for 20 years. So rereading each one has been a real delight for me. And this one is a real highlight. I really love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so nice to revisit. And it's just, it feels like Friends. I can't think of any other book that I would read. I was literally lying in bed reading it and I went, oh, death.
Yeah.
Out loud. My boyfriend was like, you okay? I was like, yeah, fine. But it's like seeing an old friend, you know, like you don't imagine that you'll feel such a kin to like, oh, the death of rats, or like, you know, these beautiful characters that you grew up with. And for me, my dad got me onto Terry Pratchett, and that's like, you know, a big kind of bond between us is that we both read and love these books so much.
Oh.
So it is a nice one too, because you do get so many of the best characters in this one, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God. So I had that moment repeatedly, but especially in the final bits where Scraps and Death were meeting, and it's like these two charming characters, and Death just cannot deal with him at all. And so like that's how we get him coming back to life, because it's like, oh, maybe he can go back. It's like you're an adequate dog, because he's trying to do like you're a good boy, etc. In Death Dog. So it's just so good.
Yeah. Oh, so good. He's very definitely a cat person, not a dog person. Poor old Death. Are there any bits that we haven't talked about, or any quotes people want to read out before we get onto some listener questions?
I think I brought up my favorites throughout the podcast.
I brought up my two favorites, but this third one that I'd forgotten about, which says, the smug mask of virtue triumphant could be almost as horrible as the face of wickedness revealed.
Oh, I had that one highlighted.
You did?
And I put a note on it that just said Twitter.
Yeah. I don't, have you watched, Catherine Ryan has a new show out called The Duchess?
No.
I haven't seen it yet. No.
There's a beautiful moment in it where she's talking to her 9-year-old daughter, who is kind of trying to shame her about something. And she's like, Olive, do you know what we call it when women use feminism to oppress other feminism? And she just goes, white feminism? She's like, well, yeah. But it's that thing of like, you know, moral indignation is just jealousy with a halo, where it's just like your virtue is as insufferable as someone's contempt sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are so many good bits, as always. I think there's only one that I really want to read out, and this is from The Journey of Granny and Oates. And there's so many good bits in their conversation where she's just sort of poking his belief and going, you don't know what you really think. I'm going to poke you and make you figure it out, is basically how I read that whole conversation. But there's great bits where she talks about the fact that Omnians now don't put people to the sword or set them on fire. They have debates. And Oates says, well, there are two sides to every question. What do you do when one of them's wrong? The reply came back like an arrow. And I'm like, yes.
Oh, yes.
More social media problems, right?
So many.
And the press and the forced balance in the public media. And but after that, there's also an exchange that I think is really great. They're talking about the nature of sin. Oates says, it's not as simple as that. It's not a black and white issue. There are so many shades of grey. Nope. Pardon? There are no greys, only whites that got grubby. I'm surprised you don't know that. And sin, young man, is when you treat people as things, including yourself. That's what sin is. It's a lot more complicated than that. No, it ain't. When people say things are a lot more complicated than that, they mean they're getting worried that they won't like the truth. People as things, that's where it starts. Oh, I'm sure there are worse crimes, but they start with thinking about people as things. And you're like, that is like one of those passages that kind of sums up Pratchett's idea of humanism in like one short passage. And there's so many other good bits, but I'm not going to read any more out because we will run out of time.
Yeah, so we got quite a lot of questions this time, so I reckon we'll crack straight into it. Ben, what's the first one?
We got a couple from Grace via email. One of those is that she talks about how Perdita, before she's able to completely take over Agnes, she takes control of her left arm. And she thought, is this to do with the whole representation of right brain versus left brain? You know, with the idea that you're right-brained, that's more creative, and left-brained people are more analytical. Do we think that Perdita is the creative side of Agnes? I had not even considered that while reading the book. And that might be because I've read enough about sort of neurology to know that the whole right-brain, left-brain thing is not really a thing. But it is a very popular idea in popular culture. So do we think there's something to that?
I don't think Perdita's the creative side, given that she can't even sing.
Yeah. I think that's a fair comment, yes.
Even if it's not written as such, I love this interpretation of it. Like, it's a very cool idea. Like you, Ben, it's not quite as divided like that. So, like, I don't think literally that doesn't mean that someone wouldn't have written it that way. Whenever someone says left arm, I'm like, heart attack. So that's where I went. But I love this.
Yeah. Grace also wondered if she was the only person who's read both Twilight and Discworld. I think we have established today that is not the case.
No.
But when she was reading it, she wondered if the whole way that Vlad is fascinated with Agnes, whether that kind of parallels Edward and Bella and the reason why Edward in Twilight is fascinated with Bella. Do you see any parallels there? Does that remind you of that relationship?
Isn't it always like men chasing women who aren't like other girls, or like, I don't know if it's necessarily a vampire thing. It's like the joy of the chase, like it's just amplified because they are predators hunting down something that doesn't want to be caught. So that's kind of like, because vampire mythology is just amplifying human nature.
Yeah,
but isn't it a valid parallel? But I haven't read both, so yeah.
There's lots of great parallels. Like all the stuff about vampires not usually having children is really interesting, because from memory in Twilight, they're not their actual children, but they live as sort of like a family unit. Five of them or six of them, I think it is.
But then Bella has a baby, vampire baby.
Exactly, which is very painful. And then the baby, who's also called Esme. The baby has
Renesmee.
Renesmee. I knew it was a terrible name, but I couldn't remember which.
So one terrible fact I remember from those books is someone explained it to me.
That's taking up real estate in your brain that someone's birthday isn't.
Yeah.
There's lots of parallels, I think. All that kind of like, yeah, you're different. You're like less susceptible. I don't know. There absolutely are. But it is also still that thing of like, a man who can't tell you a lot about the woman that he's with, just the way that she relates to him.
Yeah, it's kind of gross. We've got some other great questions about the book. We've got a couple about the way that Agnes is written about. Now, we talked about Agnes when we covered Masquerade, and Zoe, via our Discord, mentioned that and then asked if this book changed our perception of the writing around her in any way. And I think this is a really interesting question, because we talked a lot about this in Masquerade, because there's almost never a mention of Agnes turning up in a scene that doesn't take an opportunity to make a fat joke. And in this book, it is a bit different. And one of our other listeners on the Discord did point out that a lot of the time in this book, most of the time probably, it is coming from a character in the book. It's not coming from the narrative.
I thought about this because I'm trying to be very aware of fat phobia, and certainly is one of the things that you always remember about Agnes, particularly in Masquerade. The one I think about is most of Agnes stopped. It took a while for some of the outlying regions of Agnes to stop. Is that I was like, how often are other characters described by their appearance? And the answer is mostly very often, I think. Like, maybe it isn't. I don't know. It is a really valid point that you rarely get Agnes without a mention of Agnes's size, which is usually a joke. Yeah, and you do get a lot about Nanny being portrayed as portly, which is she much more is put into this kind of jolly category, even though she's bawdy, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because Lacrimosa she set up as hate at first sight, and Lacrimosa is repeatedly described as being thin. Like, they make a point of pointing out that she is thin repeatedly, not just once, not when she's introduced, it's a thing. And I wasn't sure if they're setting up like the fat girl hating the thin girl, or if it was because Lacrimosa reminds her of, say, Christine from Masquerade, who she's now sort of come around and realised was a bit shit, was very shit. So I thought that sort of deliberate contrasting was interesting and a bit sort of like when I kept coming across it.
Also, the thing too with Agnes is that it's always said inside every fat girl is a thin girl and a lot of chocolate, and Perdita is the thin girl. That's how it's described. So you also get this like equally as unhelpful like skinny bitch narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I do have a lot of conflict about that, because it's constant.
Yeah, and not all of the characters get those jokes either. One of our other listeners, Belle, on the Discord, wanted to know, why do we think Agnes gets the fat jokes, whereas Nanny, who is also portrayed as portly, as you say, doesn't really get those fat jokes? And how do we integrate those fat jokes about Agnes? And the Kelder of the Nakmak Feegle, who we barely mentioned, she also gets some fat jokes there. But how do we integrate that into our understanding of Pratchett being a humanist?
Actually, I've got I don't love saying this, but like a shitty view of that, because it's shitty on multiple levels. Agnes is of an age where you're supposed to be attractive and fuckable. Whereas Nanny and the Kelder are older. They're mothers, their grandmothers, etc. So it doesn't matter if they're attractive. That part of them is not important anymore. And that's also horrible. So I think that's part of it. That's why they don't get mocked, because it doesn't matter how they look. They're crones.
Molokov was interested on our Discord about our casting ideas. Who would we want to play in a film version? The Count, Countess, basically the Magpie family. Who would we cast as all of those? And who would we want to play Mightly Oates?
I just was picturing them as Downton Abbey, so I would love to see Lord Grantham as the Count and Lacrimosa as Lady Mary. or Edith, depending on how we want to tilt that character. But yeah.
What a grand piece of stunt casting that would be if you could get the entire family cast as people from Downton Abbey.
Just Downton Abbey. That's so
It would
wonderful.
work, actually. Yeah.
What about Oates? Who would we cast as Oates?
Oh,
I kind of feel like someone who can be a bit feckless but also bring a bit of steel. Like I think Martin Freeman is not young enough, but I think he could do a good job maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Or Mackenzie Crook. Maybe Mackenzie Crook.
Okay, Luke McGregor.
Oh, from Rosehaven for our listeners who don't know.
He would be
Luke
a
McGregor
very
by name.
sweet Mightily Oates.
Oh, he would be amazing. Oh, that's a good pick. I love it. What would be your vampire normcore activity? This is from Red of the Endless on Twitter. So if you were going to be a vampire pretending to be a normal person, what would you do? What would be your normal activity that you'd get into?
Or kombucha?
That's pretty good. I mean, I've already got mine. It's board games, right? I think that's definitely counts.
I think upcycling furniture.
Ooh, making soy candles.
Oh no. Oh, that's pretty awful.
No, making air plants for my friends.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like transplanting spider plants or something. That would be cool.
Like the balls of plants that don't, it's a thing.
My air plant, it just dies repeatedly. It dies. It briefly revives. It dies again.
They shouldn't they shouldn't exist.
No.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're the French bulldog of plants.
We did get two different people, Karen Hash on Twitter and Nicola on Instagram, both ask, basically, if we could pull a Granny Weatherwax and make vampires crave something other than blood, what would it be? I mean, I think for me it is tea. I mean, that is if it's got to be the thing that I crave, it has to be tea.
Are we trying to win a battle or are we trying to be funny?
It's up to you.
It's literally a question I ask myself every day.
Feels. Yes.
I mean, if I was trying to win a battle, I'd make them crave each other's blood.
Ooh, a strong genie-style loophole. Well done. Wishing for more wishes, wishing for infinite genies.
What's funnier than vampires wanting tea, though? Like, nothing.
I don't know. Is it making them crave something that's very difficult to come by so that, like, they remain unsated? Or is it making them crave something that's everywhere so that they're not bothered? I don't know.
I was talking to my friend Sally about this, and she said, oh, well, if it has to be something that we crave, it's like craving external validation. And I'm like, oh, if we're going to go down that road, for me, it also be like the love of a father figure. Like, it's just, there's so many sad things you could make
the brief
vampires
high
crave.
of applause.
Yeah.
Ooh, they want to become Instagram influencers, but the mirror thing also applies so they can never take selfies.
A very strong, well done. A strong choice.
That's a curse. That's a curse. I love it. Belle, via Discord, asked, we have steaks, holy water, holy symbols, lemons, beheadings. Are there any vampire tropes Pratchett didn't include?
Was it just straight up setting them on fire? Like, that's one.
Yeah,
like, the sun sets them on fire, but...
They mentioned the mirror thing in passing, but it doesn't really play a part in the story, which I thought was interesting given Granny's history with mirrors and the stuff that happens in Witches Abroad. But maybe that's why he avoided it, because he's like, I've done mirrors. I don't need to do any more mirror stuff. I can't think of any favourites that weren't in there.
He was pretty thorough.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't really have... Granny kind of does this, but you don't have the vampire with the soul archetype, like your angel kind of business.
Yeah, they're just bad.
Yeah, which is actually a good segue into another question, because this one was directed specifically at you, Liz. Molokov on Discord asked, where would you, Liz, slot in Buffy references and jokes?
Well, just as a quick aside, my other option for the joke title at the beginning of the podcast was Granny the Vampire Stayer.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, but it's like quite a big spoiler. In terms of Buffy tropes, I mean, there's jokes you can make at different points. Like, you would probably insert in, like, a joke about, do you have a soul or something, when, like, you'd have Agnes saying that to Vlad when he's trying to flirt with her. Like, that would be where you'd throw in do you have a soul? Or, like, are you trying to pretend like you have a soul kind of Buffy reference there.
Yeah. Kind of the closest they get to that is talking about how Agnes repeatedly sort of says that if she became a vampire, she wouldn't know good from evil, which I guess is kind of like being a demon in a way.
If you wanted Perdita to have like a bitchy moment, you could make a joke about how in Buffy the vampires have a vampire face that's ugly and a normal human face, and so she'd probably say something to Lacrimosa like, you've got your oh no, it's just your normal face.
That's a good one.
Maybe throwing a Watcher sort of figure in there somewhere, or even like a Slayer kind of figure, because we don't really have that in there. Like, and that's actually kind of like a part of the folklore, is having people who hunt vampires. Like, that's not just a Buffy thing, so that's perhaps a trope that's missing.
Yeah, that's a good point. There isn't the vampire hunter character. Like, you've got it's all about the regular folk rising up, but there's no Van Helsing archetype, you know, because Mightily Oates is definitely not that. So that's interesting. Yeah, that is the big one that's missing, isn't it? Yeah.
And that answers both of them very nicely.
Well done. That was very good.
Tidy.
Put those two answers in one. I love it. This question from Ilbion on Twitter. What would your awkward middle name be? I mean, poor Magrat tried her best to avoid it. Now, Ilbion was the person who said it reminded them of Cake Rex, so thank you, Ilbion. I couldn't get that out of my head once you said that.
I've kind of got an awkward, as in, like, it's not an awkward middle name. My middle name is my Chinese name, and because I don't look Chinese, despite being half Chinese, I guess mine would be like Elizabeth, my Chinese name, brackets, I'm Eurasian, Flux.
Oh, no. Yeah, okay. I don't know. What would mine be? Are we talking like that you got when you were born? Because mine would be depressing. It would be kind of like Benjamin... quick, get him christened because he's probably going to die within the hour, Mackenzie. Like, it would be bad. At the moment, it would be Ben, yes, I've not been able to have a haircut for 6 months, Mackenzie. Because as one of my friends recently said, I feel like you have suffered more from the absence of hairdressing than anyone else I know. And I was simultaneously offended and very seen. It was... We did get a few questions this month that aren't so much about this book or even Pratchett books in general, but we'll do our best to answer them. Sven on our Discord asked, what is your opinion about writing trends? Like a lot of vampire books after one series got popular, or piles of young survival books, or piles of mild smut for housewives. I think we all know what book he is referring to becoming a trend there.
Harry Potter, yeah.
If you're writing that sort of thing, are you in it for the money? And you following the trend, or are you in it for your vision? And he kind of asked this in the context of saying that we are writers ourselves. So what do you think? Do you think people who are writing those books, writing the popular coattails, are they in it for the money, or is that what they really want to write?
It's a complicated answer, but I think it is a little from column A and a little from column B. Part of the thing, I think, is why we see a wave of them afterwards is people can't write books that fast. I think perhaps one being popular opens the door to that genre, and people who've already written those books or who are already writing in that category have a higher chance of being published than they did previously. So I think there is perhaps more of you're in it for your vision than people going, vampire books sell, I'll write a vampire book.
Yeah, that makes sense. Most people don't write a book to make money, because if you've written any books, you know that it's not a very good way to make money. I mean, you know, unless you sell like Harry Potter numbers of copies or Dan Brown number of copies, like you're not going to become rich.
Yeah, I think but it is both, because there would be people who are already writing in that area who get opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have had, but it also would spark off people writing in those areas because they're interested in them, and there would be a subset of that who are writing because they hope to make money. But I think it is a little bit of all of it.
Yeah.
But the specifically writing something you wouldn't otherwise have written in a topic you otherwise wouldn't like, I think that would actually probably be quite small.
Yeah. And I mean, to take some of the specific examples, like I think vampire books have always been popular in one way or another. You know, they rise and fall. I mean, when I was in high school, it wasn't Twilight, it was Anne Rice. You know, the popular things in our culture cycle around, like they come back again. But also, like the piles of mild smut books, like there were already thousands and thousands of those already written, and they were perfectly good and people were really enjoying them. And then one got phenomenally popular because it broke through into sort of a bit more mainstream attention, and everyone noticed all the other ones that were already there, I think is kind of what happened if we're talking about Shades of Grey. Yeah, I think there's a bit of that too, where it's not so much that these things come about because of that, it's that they were always there, but now we're looking at them, you know? But that was a great question. Thank you, Sven. Grace Lee on Instagram gave us a comment, and we feel a bit underqualified to comment on it because we haven't read the book she's talking about, but she said, not directly related to Carpe Jugulum, but I'm reading the Aragon series and I feel Angela the Herbalist is how Magrat would like to be viewed by the world. And I think that's kind of an interesting angle. I want to know more about this character. So if you've read the Aragon books, please do get on the hashtag, which is Pratchat36 for this episode. Let us know what you think about that comparison. There is one question I think we're going to finish with before we say goodbye for today, which is from Ahab the Whaler on Twitter,
Great name,
who asked, what happens when you run out of Pratchett's novels? This is a genuine question about your future plans. Really, our intention is that when we run out of Pratchett things to talk about, that's it. The podcast is over. Like, this is a project that has a beginning and an end. And that would mean that when that time eventually comes, we'll wind it up. I mean, I think there's a few extra things we could talk about. A lot of people have been asking us if we will cover Rhianna Pratchett's book that was recently published. It's a fighting fantasy book, which is kind of like a choose your own adventure book, but mashed up with a bit of Dungeons and Dragons. I definitely want to read it. I think we could talk about that on the podcast. There's a lot of the short stories we still haven't covered. There's still a bunch of books. Like, we're probably a bit more than halfway now, but not that much more. But yeah, honestly, our plan is to talk about every Pratchett book and then wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I mean, we could do a different podcast on a different topic, potentially, but I think with this one, we wouldn't drag it out because everyone hates, like, when a show has 5 extra seasons when it should have stopped in season 4. Like, everyone hates that.
Yeah.
And there's a definite end point. Like this one, I think you got to respect that.
Yeah. And
so,
this is
as in we have to respect that.
Yeah. And this is a big project. Like, we knew going into this that it was going to be a big deal to do, not just, even just doing the Discworld books is a big deal. Again, props to all the other Discworld reread podcasts that are out there. That's a big enough project as it is. And deciding we're going to do all of them is huge. And I think, if we carry through with our current plan, which is to end with the Shepherd's Crown, it's going to be a huge emotional point to end on. And I don't think we'll want to come back after that. I think we'll feel like it's the end.
Yeah. We're not vampires.
No.
We're going to come back in 50 years.
No. We won't get thrown off the edge of the disc or float around in the ocean for a while. But I
don't like to think about it, so...
yeah, you just pretend it's not going to happen. We'll just go forever. And of course, you can always listen to the old episodes again. I've been doing that recently, and they're quite listenable. We've tried not to make them too topical.
Or we do a podcast where we listen to our old episodes about each specific book and then do an episode about the podcast, and it just gets real meta.
Oh my God, we need the Inception soundtrack.
Chat.
Oh God, it's too real. It could happen. But that's it for questions. So that also means that's it for this episode. Jill, it's been so wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, we say coming, you're still in your own home. But
I'm wearing slippers.
If people want to find out more about what you're up to and hear some of your work, where can they find you?
I am at Gillian Cosgriff on most internets. Gillian with a G. Cos like a lettuce, Griff like a griffin. Not Cosgrove. Yeah, I have a Bandcamp and a website and all that bizzo if you want to have a listen. And I have nothing on because coronavirus.
Well, we'll link to all those things so our listeners can find you and enjoy some of your amazing songs. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
But we will be back next month, of course. And the reason we can come back every month until we are done and have read every book is thanks to our wonderful supporters. So thank you everybody who's supporting us through Pozible. Thank you everyone who has rated and reviewed us in the Apple Podcast directory or whatever directory you happen to use. That is a great way to help us. If you want to support us and you haven't got the cash to sling us a few bucks a month, that's another thing you can do. Or just tell your friends who really like Terry Pratchett that we are a thing and that they might enjoy it. That also helps us out because the more people who listen, the more people will sign up and the more sustainable it is for us to keep going to the end. So thank you everyone who has supported us. And thank you to everyone who listens as well, because without your questions and feedback, there'd be no point in us doing this. But specifically, we will be back next month to talk about a particular book. And that book, Liz, is Da Bomb, would you say?
Quite literally, perhaps.
Yes.
Our next book is going to be Johnny and the Bomb. And joining us is returning guest, author Wilkes Darkus.
It's going to be a lot of fun to have him back. He talked to us, of course, about one of Pratchett's early sci-fi novels last time. In fact, I would go so far as to say we made him read The Dark Side of the Sun because he did not enjoy it. So I hope he has a much better time with Johnny and the Bomb as we finish off the Johnny Maxwell trilogy. If you've got questions about that for next time, please send them to us via social media using the hashtag Pratchett37, or you can send us an email at chat@pratchettpodcast.com. But until next time, please remember, I don't drink coffee. You've been listening to Pratchett, a monthly Terry Pratchett book club podcast with Pratchetters Elizabeth Flux, Ben McKenzie, that's me, and guest Gillian Cosgriff. Pratchett is produced and edited by me, with music by David Ashton of Sample and Hold Studios. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pratchett Podcast, and listen to past episodes and support the production of new ones via pratchettpodcast.com. Join the conversation for this episode using the hashtag Pratchett36.
Pratchett is brought to you by Splendid Chaps Productions. We make entertainment for your ears, like the Doctor Who podcast Splendid Chaps and time travel comedy series Night Terrors. To find out more, visit splendidchaps.com.